Yeah, she thinks she may have caught a cold.
Oh. Great.
I don't know where Ben and Erica and Luis are though.
I didn't see him. Everybody's disoriented now that it's coming.
Yeah.
I was. It was like, oh, it's time to go.
How does it change your operation?
It starts earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, and then of course everybody wants to go later because it's light.
Yeah.
And right now the light's been between 2 and 4. And I had kids getting a little bit earlier.
Me too.
Yeah. Seems like you gotta like fish, but you also gotta like data, like temperature and, you know,
Yeah, entomology.
yeah.
Well, here's Ben. We're taking a poll of who's the most disoriented now that it's been light longer.
Thank you for that email. Regina, good.
Hey, Ben.
Oh.
I sent you an email. Did you see that?
I did, yeah.
You didn't see it?
I did see it.
Yeah, there's so many options.
Oh,
on the
do you have to like
different
pick
things.
your sessions?
Well, some of them.
Oh.
I think there's some sections. Warren signed up. I only started to look at it. It's like, do you want to have one of us and visit our?
Right.
Drew Gourdet.
projects? Do you
His
wanna-
name, it's Andrew.
Andrew.
Okay.
That was nice stuff.
Yeah, I know. I've tried to register.
Yeah,
teachers.
But if well, I shouldn't be smart.
You have to register.
Yeah.
yourself.
He's-
I registered Lonnie for a
he's
conference
adding
and I
our-
said yes to
Our
everything.
name as a reference, so he's
I'm sure he is.
wanting us to be, so I think that's why the timing is.
I'm sure he is. Maybe next time.
The end result worked out. That's for sure. Isn't that right? We got a thank you card from
Right?
our
He called me out.
our,
I signed you up
executive
for
search, Drew. And I said, it all worked out, didn't it?
This is different.
Hello, Dan. Hello, Marty.
Hi,
This is
Luis.
different. This one's way different.
Well, thank you so
All
much.
right.
This is from Joan Lamont.
Oh, really? Oh, for just making comments?
I went to one of their.
Nice.
Smiling.
She's a good lady.
Very good. Wait, she said what? Residence is the name of it? What's the place?
Frank and Rosalie visitor, but I don't know where. Can I ask one favor before we get going? Can we turn on the screen? All right. Here comes Erica. Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. Tonight is a work session, which means we don't take any formal action, but we get to have good roundtable dialogue. And tonight we have 4 items on the agenda. Item 1, and I'll just read them off real quick before we get going. Crystal River Restoration Update. We're going to have a town center property discussion, property right over there. We'll have some visitors from Youth and Family Advisory Council, and then we'll end the night with the street closure. Probably a lively street closure discussion. All right. So without further ado, would our river experts want to join us for our Crystal River Restoration Update? Lonnie, you got to stay on this side of the table.
Good evening. This has been a long road for us trying to keep this project going, and it looks like we're in the final phases of it. We're at a point where we are preparing to go to bid and see if we can get everything going. We've got one more grant that we're looking to hopefully be awarded on today's Wednesday, tomorrow. And after that, hopefully we'll be able to go full bore and go to bid and select a contractor and get something done.
All right.
So with that, I've got Quinn Donnelly and Heather Lewin. Quinn's with River Restoration. He's done a lot of the engineering work with DHM Design. And Heather has been fundamental in working with CWCB and all the grant opportunities that we've been doing and working with the outreach with all the different organizations in the valley.
All right.
So I'll turn it over to Quinn.
Thanks for joining us.
Have him kind of go over the groundscape.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks for letting me come up and give you guys an update on the project. If you can believe it, the last time we gave an update was August 13th of 2019, which seems like a lifetime ago for a bunch of reasons. So at the time, the town had selected a preferred alternative, and that was chosen through a public process. The preferred alternative is in your packets, and I know we've kind of talked about that before. And then we developed a 60% design for cost estimating purposes and then for permitting with the Army Corps of Engineers. So that process identified some like major funding needs for the project. There's a breakdown of kind of the project cost in your packet as well. And so that's really been the focus the last 2 years. And as Mark said, Roaring Fork Conservancy in particular, Heather Lewin was instrumental in that. I counted them up before we came here. We have funding from 12 different sources. So you can imagine like trying to juggle all that and get all those things in place. And it took a lot of work, and we're very thankful that Heather led that charge. So the other piece was the Army Corps permit. The project received that permit last summer in June of 2021, and that's good for 2 years. And you can always ask for an extension, but as I'll get into the schedule here in a second, I don't think we're going to need to. So I want to, if you go to your packet page 6, and I don't know if the page numbers are the same, but there's kind of a brief overview of the project budget, and then a summary of all the funding. The project's broken up into several main categories, kind of the Weaver diversion and stuff around that, the channel improvements themselves and the bank stabilization, and then the upland improvements to Riverfront Park. And then the funding is coming from a bunch of different sources, and I'll list off a couple of them here. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, through a couple different avenues. Fishing is Fun was a primary one. Pickens County Healthy Rivers got a GOCO grant. We got a grant through the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation called Water Smart, which is quite the process to get through, if you can imagine, when the federal government's involved. The town has contributed a fair amount, both on the park side, on the diversion side. And those are summarized here, and I'm sure you're aware of those. And then probably the biggest one is the CWCB through the Water Plan grant, almost half the cost of the project. We coordinate a lot with Chris Sturm and that group, and we're supposed to find out tomorrow, but we've gotten basically support from their staff, and rarely does the board like kind of go against what the staff recommends. Is there any questions on the budgeting or the fundraising? I kind of went through it quick, but I didn't want to repeat everything that you guys.
Just very, very impressive. Nice job. I mean, this is a small project with a lot of complexity. So thank you for doing that on behalf of the town.
And so there's two schedules in here. One kind of the summary schedule, which I won't go over, but that's kind of how we got here to date. You know, this project's been going for quite a while, even before the design team got involved. Lots of planning on the stakeholders' part, and then kind of stepping through that public review process and get their comments and get that into a preferred alternative. So on page 7 is kind of the proposed schedule moving forward. And so there was the mountain whitefish in the Crystal River is becoming more of a threatened species. It's not listed, but they've seen a large decline in the fish population in the Crystal. I've read some reports that said like up to 80% in the last 10 years, but don't quote me on that. But so that made some changes to our work schedule. And so we had planned on building the project in the wintertime, which actually is kind of advantageous because, you know, there's never a risk of the water coming up. It's easier to kind of keep control of sediment and things. But so last fall, became aware of this issue. We jumped through some hoops and we kind of transitioned to a summertime construction. And so last month we had 2 different contractors come out and kind of review the plans, walk through the site, kind of give us their thoughts on the constructability, the schedule, and everything like that. We got some good advice from them and some assurance that the project can be built in a season, all the in-channel work. We got coordinated with CPW, got an endorsement from them that they're going to basically allow us to get into the river earlier than we normally would. Normally it's August 15th for this area. And they're going to let us get into the river once the water's down. Just recognizing that trying to build the project over 2 years is a much larger impact than just getting in maybe outside that window a little bit and getting it done. So having kind of gotten that assurance, we kind of moved forward with keeping the plans as they were. And so the design team, which like Mark said, is River Restoration and then DHM, both based out of Carbondale, to finish up the construction documents, which we're doing that here in the next week or 2. And then we'll, as Mark said, we'll hopefully be going out to bid in early April. The bidding construction climate's pretty competitive right now. Most of those guys are super busy. So we've been trying to build interest for the project so we get enough bids, we can get a good pricing on that. And then, so it's once the project's awarded in May, we will, the contractor can start mobilizing onto the site and start doing some of the out of channel work once the river comes down, which, depending on the snowpack, how it goes the rest of the year, could be mid-June to late June. And then as soon as that water's down enough to where the contractor feels comfortable, he'll get into the river and start doing the in-channel work. It'll be, in order to get it all done in time, it'll probably be a big crew with multiple pieces of equipment working in multiple areas. So it'll look pretty, people walking over the bridge will look down. I don't know if you've ever seen a project being built in the river. It's kind of like a pretty messy process until it's all done. So I'm sure folks will make comments and have questions and things, but just, I know the town's planning on doing kind of a public outreach process. So then we have to be out of the river by September 30th, because like I said, the mountain whitefish concerns, and also it's a brown trout spawning period. And then the contractor will finish up the out of channel work in the fall. And then some of the revegetation and some of those things might slip into spring 2023, just because you want to plan at the right time. Access to the projects to 2 different spots. We've always planned on going through private property owners, kind of right by the Weaver Head Gate. Mark's been working with him to get permission for access. We've built up a pretty detailed staging plan. And then we're going to have a secondary access actually off Crystal Bridge Drive, right at the bridge. There's a town of Carbondale easement that kind of works its way down over the cart path that we'll be using for some of that work right by the bridge. So I think that's it for an update. We're, like Mark was saying, the project's been a long time coming. The fundraising hurdles were impressive that Heather and the group got through, and we're really excited about getting this project built. I think it'll, have a huge benefit for the river itself. I think the improvements that DHM's developed in the park will be, great, just to kind of help build those river stewards of the future. We want to use it as an educational opportunity and everything that we've talked about before. So I'll open up for questions. Hope I didn't talk too fast.
Thank you, Quinn. Quinn, I hate to ask this, but what's the contingency plan if construction bids come back higher than expected?
Yeah, so we have a pretty big buffer. So the fundraising budget that we have been fundraising for assumes a two-phase plan, so over 2 years. So we have, not only do we have a 15% contingency built in just our cost estimate, we went ahead and left that money for the overall project in there. And so right now we have a $300,000 or $400,000 buffer. So, and you know, the prices are all over the place as far as construction. So I'm not guaranteeing that we're going to be under that, but I feel more comfortable about this than I do most projects where we don't have that extra buffer built in.
Great, nice job.
And so if we do get bids that are too high, we'll have to, you know, meet with the town and figure out what to do to move forward. And actually, if we do, Heather has some contingency funding in place. And Heather, if you want to talk about that for a second.
Sure.
Sorry, I totally forgot.
That's okay. One of the funding sources that Quinn didn't mention is the river districts. If you're familiar with that recent ballot initiative, they've got a pretty large pool of money for on the ground projects that are ready to go. And so we received about $100,000 from that pool, or the town did. And they basically said, if there are issues, if you need more money, come back, talk to us again. It's not a, you know, it's not a sure thing, but it's an invitation to go back. And so
Great. Thanks for.
it's hopeful at least.
Yeah.
I guess one other piece that's worth mentioning is just kind of the bigger picture context. This is one of the biggest projects to come out of the Crystal River Management Plan. That was published in 2016, a process that was a pretty big stakeholder process from about 2011 through 2015, 16, when the report came out. We've done a lot of smaller and on the ground pieces, and this is sort of really the first big on the ground project to come out of that planning process. It's got a lot of leadership from the town as far as what you guys are doing to benefit the river, as far as ditch efficiencies and riparian health, and it kind of hits all those marks of things that we're looking to see in a river project. So just wanted to thank you guys for taking this on and for your leadership. And we're hoping that we can see some success in this and some similar projects in other ditches on the Crystal and other parts of the valley as well. So thank you all.
I mean, I think town staff has done a great job. The community has also asked us to lead in this world, in this regard for the Crystal River. And I think all of our partners have really helped us do that. So thank you. And Mark, thank you for championing the project too. And I didn't mean that like that. It's not like closing statements. So
Yeah, no, any other questions or comments?
Ben, and then Lon.
Yeah, thanks for this update. I'm amazed that it's been since 2019 also. It's slow in some ways, but flown in others, I guess. It doesn't seem like that long ago. Could you just highlight some of the public improvements around the access, the ADA access, and the outdoor classroom? I think that those are going to be some of the things that residents of Carbondale are going to use and appreciate the most, even though the ecological and stream flow stuff is probably the most important thing happening here. I just wondered if you could highlight those for us.
I can give you sort of the use perspective, the hard on the ground stuff. Quinn can give you a little bit better answer to, but basically it should create your first easily accessible point in the Crystal River within the town of Carbondale. You're within walking distance of all the schools where that access point is. The classroom is going to be in an already disturbed area right by the bridge. So we're not going to create a lot more disturbance in places kind of further upstream that are a little quieter, that are those nesting areas and good healthy riparian habitat. Those will stay more primitive trails with that bigger classroom access right by the bridge. Roaring Fork Conservancy already has about 500 students per year in the Carbondale schools that they're teaching that are in walking distance of that space. And our education staff has told us they'll be pretty much using that right away. So we're really excited about the opportunity it creates to really connect the town to the river.
And if you could, I mean, comment on the on the ground stuff. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
I remember seeing some initial sketches. It was a big ramp that needed to kind of go way out and way back. I wonder if it's going to end up looking like that. And just, I think that's a big statement to say that this is the first easily accessible access point on the Crystal River. Our town wants to celebrate the rivers, but has a hard time finding them amidst all the private properties sometimes. So I just think this is a really big win.
Right. Yeah, I think, the primary element as far as accessibility is that ramp that you mentioned. And so it's the only thing that's north of the bridge. And it's going to be basically just, because the roadway and the bridge is, 15 or 20 feet higher than that bench that most of the park is on. So the goal is to be able to provide better access down there. So there'll be a ramp on the north side of the bridge that kind of switchbacks, like you said, to get that, it's like a 5% slope you'd need for that accessibility criteria. And then from there, you'll be able to access into the park. It's all pretty flat, and we're going to put some, wider, maybe firmer, none of it's paved, but firmer trails in that first part of the park, like Heather was talking about. That's where the outdoor classroom is. And then as you get further into the park, further upstream, it's, more primitive. We've kind of used maybe the Forest Service approach, where you kind of design things based on kind of level of ability. And maybe, as you go into the park, you might need assistance or something, but it wasn't designed to like a kind of a classic ADA criteria, but just more to kind of increase accessibility at different levels.
Thanks. I just think we should be really proud that we're adding ADA accessible fishing and river access that doesn't exist in many
Yeah.
places. And then I think it'll just become a destination when people on a hot day want to go get their feet in the water. It'll be
Right.
for classroom use, but I think it'll be a really big deal for this town to have a good river park.
And now that you mentioned that, we are, so a lot of the upland work involves riparian restoration. And, we want folks to use the park, but we also want that vegetation to grow up along the riverbanks. I think that's part of the reason why we see a lot of erosion along that stretch. And so we are providing along the trail access for anglers to be able to get in and out of the river. Because if you don't have that access, a lot of times people make their own social trails, and then you run into a lot of the same problems we've had now. And I do think a lot of the improvements in the river are going to provide better connectivity, deeper water through the stretch. And we're putting a couple of pools in that weren't in there now, and putting a lot of aquatic habitat elements. I do think from a angler perspective, and it's going to be an improvement over what's there now. Maybe provide another reach for folks to fish outside of like Staircase Park when the water gets low.
And all that, the ramp and everything should be late summer, fall. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, it's hard to say as far as how the contractor prioritizes things and how big his crew is. I think outside of that in-water work window, we know that work has to be done. Then we're going to kind of leave it up to the contractor, depending on how he wants to schedule things for that work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Lonnie, did you have a question?
Oh, housekeeping detail. So when you go through that easement on the north side of the bridge that crosses the cart path, you did talk to the golf course about that, right?
We have been. So Mark's been coordinating with the golf course, and we prepared some exhibits, and we're actually talking to that homeowner right there, because even though it's a town easement, town-owned property, it is right next to a property owner. So we are doing our due diligence on that side, just making sure everybody's aware of what's going on and getting their buy-off.
Okay, great, thank you. And then lastly, the floodplain disconnect, we're gonna just put that aside for now, where the nesting grounds are, right? Wasn't there a floodplain disconnect that we had talked about?
Correct. Yeah, we're not, based on a lot of the feedback we got during the public review process, particularly from the Audubon Society, we really kind of heard the message that we want to take a very light hand approach to the park area, particularly outside of that outdoor classroom. So yeah, we're not trying to reconnect the river. Technically that's all in the floodplain during a 100-year event, if we ever have one of those again. But as far as like providing new places for the river to go, no, we're not doing any of that.
Okay, great, thanks. Great update, you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Quinn, Heather, Mark. Thank you very much.
But
Yeah. If there's complaints over the summer, just have them call the mayor. All right. All right, Bob, welcome. Moving on to item number 2. We are the very grateful recipients of a couple of donations, but tonight we're talking about town center property right over here. And thanks, Bob, for digging in and doing some due diligence for us.
Thank you, Bob Schultz, Robert Schultz Consulting. I'll be pulling up a PowerPoint here. Will you enable me?
I made you a panelist. How do I make you share the screen?
Yay.
And did you say Heather's on?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity to be involved in this pretty remarkable situation in which we find ourselves. I also want to thank Janet and Mary who helped me digging for documents. There's quite a paper trail around, particularly around the town center. This is an interim report. The research isn't complete, so we may find additional information, but this gives you the best information available at this time. The purpose of this meeting is really for you as landowners to understand more about your property. And so if at any time you want to ask a question, this is your time. If I use jargon that you want to call me on, once again, if we leave this and you feel like you have a better understanding of the property across the street and the property over at Town Center, then I'll feel like we've accomplished our goal. It's not a site planning exercise. It's more like due diligence and site assessment. So for instance, if we were going to buy this property, you might ask somebody like me to say, we want you to dig into this property and tell us what we're going to discover when we do the due diligence and the assessment of the site. One of the things that I'd like to do tonight, particularly for those watching, is clarify what is and what isn't a part of this, because I think there's a few different versions out there. The American Tree and Cement property that we'll be discussing is directly to the east of Town Hall. We collect Christmas trees and leaves and hazardous waste, and we park on it. And that's one of the parcels that the town is examining in this exercise. The second one is the Town Center project. I don't know if you can see my cursor. It surrounds the Thunder River Theater property here. And it doesn't include the Fonte property, which is the property with an X on it here, which is across the street over where Granetta Panini is, or what some people call the Christmas tree lot, or where the co-op used to be. It's 579 Main Street is its proper title. There's grass and a fence around it now. That is not a part of this. Both of those properties, Fonte and 579 Main, are owned by private owners who at some point will propose development on those. So clarifying what we're looking at, it's the blue boxes without the X's. The very existence of Carbondale is tied to the train. If it wasn't for the train that came through here, both on the Rio Grande and up the Crystal, we would probably be meeting at Cooperton Town Hall right now. This drawing is from a book about trains up the Crystal River Valley. And the property that we're looking at was a part of that Crystal Rail Corridor. There's an arrow here you see that says Promenade. That's the property at the end of the Dinkle building that the town has the promenade as you come off of Main Street to the alley. So that gets you a little bit oriented. You see where the Dinkle building is. And then this property, there was a Y. I've seen different versions of where exactly that Y was, but it's somewhere through this area. And the Y connected the Crystal to the down valley tracks on the Rio Grande and the up valley tracks going up. The American Tree and Cement property is also on this property, and it was owned by the Southern Pacific Railway at this point in time. So the two properties, the American Tree and Cement site is about 3/4 of an acre. You might hear a different figure from people. That's because it used to include 4th Street. And so it was more like almost an acre at that point in time. And as part of a subdivision that I'll talk to you about later, or now, 1997, the owners were required to dedicate enough land to allow 4th Street to connect. It didn't go across the railroad tracks back when I first moved here. And in fact, right before the coal mines closed up and the train stopped running, there was a train that was long enough that it blocked off both County Road 100 and 133. And there was for about 30 minutes, no way to get to Highway 82. You can imagine today if that happened, the calls that you would get. Starting in 2006, the town started leasing the property and for parking and event use on our events, which are pretty frequent. The parking lot is well used. Both this and the town center property are zoned historic commercial core. On the town center parcel, there's 16 lots that were donated to the town, and they range from 2,250 square feet to 9,629 square feet. If you add them all together, it's 1.4 acres of land. The Bonanza Trailer Park, there was a single family home from what I can see in old aerial photos, maybe in the 50s, early 60s. And then the Bonanza Trailer Park was in there. I count 19 units on a drawing that I have, but I've also heard 18 mobile homes there. And in 2001, there was some land assemblage that started taking place. So buying parcels and trying to create some land assemblage in town that ultimately became the town center proposal. In 2003, the plat was filed for filing one of the town center. And so the backbone building was developed, or what I call the backbone building, right across the street. And in 2005, filing two was platted and the Thunder River Theater building went up. So two things that a client would typically ask for, due diligence and site assessment. So due diligence is looking mostly at more legal matters, any encumbrances to the title, water rights, zoning, previous land use commitments, asbestos and environmental concerns, soils concerns, leases. And then on the site assessment side, it's more about this particular piece of property. What are its unique attributes? So topography, the existing conditions, whether utilities are around, do we have good solar exposure? Which way is the wind coming from? Are there noises and things in the area? Does it have good views? How do you get access to the public streets? Is it convenient? Is there any historical designations in the area? And so that's more about the specific piece of property that's under examination. So starting with the American Tree and Cement, this is that parcel. A couple of things that I would point out to you. You see at the top of the drawing on a diagonal is the Rio Grande corridor and the trail. The lot is irregular, and where it comes down into Colorado Avenue, there is a lot of right-of-way. So from the Fonte side of Colorado to the American Tree and Cement side is over 100 feet of right-of-way. Why is that interesting or important? If you wanted to do something on this property and you needed an extra 10 feet or 20 feet or 30 feet, there might be the opportunity to adjust the boundary of the property to accommodate that particular use. This image is from 1983 aerial of Carbondale. So starting at the bottom, I've got an arrow going to the Dinkle building, since that's everybody's orientation point to figure out where things are in Carbondale. Going clockwise, the Bonanza Trailer Park, you can see I've got an arrow pointing to that. And yes, there were trees back then and mobile homes. A thing that was interesting to me, maybe it will or won't be to you, you can see a little bit of a curved line that I've got a yellow arc arrow going to. I believe that's the down valley leg of the Y that connected. And then most importantly, the American Tree and Cement property, you can see the buildings that were there. There was a fuel petroleum storage facility there, a Mossbarger fuel. The buildings even went all the way out into what's today 4th Street. And you can see that there's no connection at that moment in time. All of the properties under review have previously been owned by experienced developers. Capable people have looked at them, and I've benefited in this work from those reports that were done by quality engineers and others. On the American Tree and Cement, on the due diligence side, on title encumbrances, there used to be an affordable housing covenant on the property, and the town allowed the landowner to relocate that covenant over to filing 2 of Town Center. The reason for that covenant was when filing 1 was built, there was no affordable housing built in it. And they had a credit or a requirement for, I think it was 3/4 of a unit. So that got delayed. And then of course the project went under a couple of times. And in the midst of that, the town required the previous landowners to put a covenant on this property over here that it couldn't be developed or sold without meeting that requirement. When the town got ready to purchase that, the agreement was to move that requirement over to filing 2 to lots 1, 9, and 10. So that affordable housing covenant and that requirement to catch up on the affordable housing still exists, but it's over there now. On the environmental site assessment side, in 2007, there was a ESA done on the property, and they, the people who do this work go through records and look at everything that's ever happened. There had been a fire back in the 80s on the property. They did some soil samples, and they found some evidence of petroleum-related contamination. At that time, it did not trigger requiring remediation. Standards are always changing, and they tend to get tougher. If you wanted to put buildings over there, then I think you would want to do some additional soil sampling. I don't think it's a deal killer, but there may be something that you have to do in order to properly tend to the soils that could have some issues. In terms of the zoning UDC comp plan, it's HCC zoning. Both the 2013 and the current draft of the update suggest that growth is appropriate in this location. It's categorized in the draft of the update as secondary frontage. And what that means is that the primary frontage, the consultants are suggesting that you be strict on the commercial requirement on the ground floor that's in the HCC zone district. In the secondary, they're saying maybe we should revisit this and have a little more flexibility on that because these properties aren't really developing. In terms of previous land use actions, we have the dedication. As far as I can tell, the requirements of the subdivision improvement agreement from 1997 have been fulfilled. And there is in fact a road out there, and it was paved. So I think you got your what you asked for out of that. There's no evidence of asbestos. The soils report, I'm chasing the one for Colorado Place. I did look at the foundation plan, and there was nothing remarkable about the foundations that had to be done. I'm assuming that's good news on the soil front, but I'm still trying to chase that down. But I think as a landowner, you should assume that you have reasonable soils to build on. The only previous leases that I'm aware of were the fuel facility and then the town's leases for parking. And in terms of demographics that someone would look at, you have a lot of information about housing needs from the regional housing study. You have census information, you have your comp plan, and then you have the art space study that was done about housing for creatives. Mentioning this potential flexibility, if you've walked down From True Nature, you know, the sidewalk just ends at the end of Colorado Place. It would probably be nice to have a sidewalk coming through there at some point. So maybe there might be a reason to adjust the boundary at some point to allow a better corner at Colorado and Fourth, and maybe give up some land to make that sidewalk transition in the right of way. Not necessarily, but just wanted you to know that it's out there. The HCC zone requires the first 25 feet of buildings fronting the public right of way to be commercial and to have some public presence, so to create activity at the street level. So it has an effect on what you can do with the property. And this property, I estimate about 310 feet of frontage. And if you put parking behind and either commercial or residential on top of it, at the ground floor, you'd have between 8,000 and 10,000 square feet of commercial required in order to meet the HCC zone. In terms of site assessment, it's basically a flat site. It's a little bit of a dip as you go towards Colorado Place. There are utilities in both Fourth and Colorado. And it's got good solar access. The wind is predominantly from south-southwest, industrial area to the north. So if you're thinking of residential uses there, that's a consideration. Good views. Both properties just have tremendous access to amenities. The recreation center. So even if you live in a small unit, you can walk a block down the street and be in a gym. And so it doesn't need the amenities that, you know, some other projects might want. Good access. There is likely to be a development proposal at Fonte at some point. And so coordinating what the road looks like and the sidewalks makes a lot of sense in terms of thinking about the future. There's likely to be change across the rail corridor at some point. And so pedestrian connectivity becomes more of an issue in the future. There aren't any historical designations that I'm aware of in the proximity to the American Tree and Cement site that would be of interest. In terms of unique attributes and opportunities in the corridor investment study that was done when the local communities bought the rail corridor, this was identified as a potential site for a transit stop for downtown. So, and it was proposed to have a kiss and ride. So rather than having a big, like you have with a park and ride out there, it would be a place where you could drop somebody off or they could walk. If you run a half a mile radius from this location, at least at that time when we did the study, about 70% of the people in Carbondale could walk to this particular location. If you did decide to develop this into something else, it would be wise to give some consideration to where does the hazardous waste day go? Where does the Christmas tree collection go? Where do the leaves go? So that there's a plan for that. In thinking about what a development might look like, you have the American Tree and Cement parcel here on the left and Colorado Place condominiums on the right. If you just pick Colorado Place up in your mind and move it to the left, that gives you a sense of what a development might look like. Right now with Colorado Place, it only has commercial on the frontage of Colorado. So it would have to have commercial on Colorado and Fourth. This is a bigger site. The Colorado Place has 4 commercial units and 15 residential units. And this site would be more like 8 to 10,000 square feet of commercial, about 20 larger condo units or 30 to 40 small units. You can pretty gracefully get 60 parking spaces underneath the building footprint that I kind of laid out based on an expanded Colorado Place. And so that gives you some sense of scale. It isn't the site plan, but if you're just wondering in your mind, that's a back of the envelope. Another way of looking at it is it's been envisioned for parking in the past, and it is parking today. But there's also been thoughts about having structured parking there. If you're familiar with the parking garage in Glenwood at Cooper and 9th by CMC, so that's half an acre lot. This is 3/4 of an acre. It's 2 stories and they have 150 cars. It's a very efficient parking lot layout, and it's similar in that it's long and narrow. So here I would expect to be able to get about 200 spaces in a 2-story parking garage. There's also the possibility, if you wanted to go to 3 stories, to intermix some commercial frontage. It's a much more complicated project to develop financially than just doing a parking garage and having a bond or whatever for the parking garage, but that does exist as a possibility. So before I move on to town center, just, do you feel like you have a better sense of the American Tree and Cement property? Any questions, things you want to clarify? Call that a victory then.
Bob, just one number that I didn't catch. You said there's about 15 residential units in Colorado Place, and you estimated about what if we did the same kind of pattern here?
You would be 20 small,
Okay.
like 800 square foot units.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 1,200 to 1,400 square foot units for large is 20. If you go to small units of 800 square feet, you're more like 30.
Okay, so 20 to 30.
If you added some parking outside of the building footprint, you might be able to get more than 30. But parking starts to be an issue.
Okay, thank you.
So moving on to the town center. In terms of the site history, as I said, I found an aerial photo that I believe shows a house at one point on the site after the railroad was gone. This is an image of the Bonanza Trailer Park. Some of you will remember back in the day. If you could squint really hard, you would see the cabins in the very back of this image that are still there over at 6th and Colorado. In 2001, it was acquired as part of this land assemblage. In 2002, the mobile homes were removed. And of course, that led to filing 1 and filing 2. Filing 1 has 2 lots that were donated to the town. I've marked them here as unbuilt. When filing 1 came through, there was a funny little configuration to this filing. So in the center here, you see this is the 2020 iCare building. It was not a part of it. But if you go down towards Steve's Guitars, there's the Equus investment, the old saloon, and then a couple of lots. Well, before filing 1, those lots ran the opposite direction, which didn't make any sense because the lots ran perpendicular to the buildings. So when they did filing 1, they worked with the landowner of that property and said, well, we can switch these around and then you'll have 3 lots, but they'll be pointing the right direction. So that's kind of how they got involved in filing 1. And then at the top of your screen, you see the what I call the backbone building. It has Green Line Architects and Backbone, and then residential above it. One thing of note, this square or this rectangle, can you see where I'm pointing?
Mhm.
This was an easement that was granted by the previous owner when they donated the land to you that reserved 4 parking spaces and an easement for the benefit of filing 1. So that complicates the development of this particular lot, but we'll deal with that when we have to. And then, I'm sorry.
It was worth it.
And then, yeah, it was reflected in the price. And then below that, there's another lot that's interesting because It's really important in terms of drawing people across the alley from Main Street down the promenade and across that alley to make the promenade work. There needs to be something there that's a draw, but it's a particularly challenging development site. So we don't have to solve that tonight. We're just saying, here's the lay of the land. So that's filing one. It's the two lots together are 17,754 acres. Filing two is mostly gravel parking area now. The Thunder River Theater was the one built on 2 lots. And then there are 14 lots around that were donated. Kind of the big ideas in filing two were the promenade, to try and figure out a way to make that a very active, alive, vibrant corridor. And the second were this 24-foot easement for access and utilities. So the curb cut that's over there today, if you pull into the gravel where we use for parking, although it's not a parking lot, that is in the exact location of that easement. That serves as delivery, parking, access, and utility corridor. So it's a very big idea. Those two north-south corridors kind of tell you what you can do without totally wiping the map clean and starting all over. So there's a finite number of possibilities of what you can do in this location. Together, it's just short of an acre of land in the 14 lots here. From a due diligence perspective, one of them that I'll talk a little bit more about maybe later, but a condo master association was created for all of this. So the lot where Equus is and the 2 empty lots next to that, the Backbone building and Thunder River Theater and all the lots that were donated to you. That association has not really done much and has not really, from my perspective, contributed to the success of this. One of the questions that will be asked in the future is whether it may make sense to continue that master association, whether this land and the land where Equus and those lots and the Backbone building, whether they have a common destiny, that it makes sense. In 2019, when this property was under contract to another developer, they submitted to the town an application to remove the condo association. The majority property owner has that right until March of 2023, so less than a year from today. And you are now the majority property owner. Obviously, that would want to be done in consultation with other property owners, but at least the owner of the Morningwood lots where Equus and those are signed documents back in 2019 wanting to get out of it as well. So something for future. Both properties have mineral rights have been separated from the property. It's not uncommon here in the Western United States, but it is something to know. And we have that affordable housing covenant on lots 1, 9, and 10. Those are the ones closest to Colorado and filing two. So just as an FYI, if you decide you want to do affordable housing, at least part of this, that's probably not an issue. The other thing about this property was that it was vested back when the affordable housing requirement was 15% instead of 20%, and there was no RO restriction at this time. May or may not be relevant. In terms of environmental site assessment, there was one done by that same 2007. They did not identify any concerns for the town center property. Water rights, there were none that were identified. On the American Tree and Cement, the town got a quick claim deed to water rights, but there were no water rights identified. So far, I don't see any evidence that there are water rights associated with these properties. Same thing with the comp plan, and UDC want growth in this particular location to create a more vibrant downtown. it's vibrant now, but to, kind of increase the level of activity. In terms of previous land use actions, there are a subdivision improvement agreement. Some of you will remember that the town exercised, how you get a letter of credit from developers to ensure that they provide their public improvements. Well, the second time this property went under, the town said, that's it. We're taking the money and we're building the improvements. So the alley got paved, 6th Street got paved, all of the sidewalks around that property got put in, the bulb outs, street lamps, all of that was from that money that you require through your subdivision improvement agreement. And when it became apparent to the town that this was not really moving forward, the town exercised its right. And it's just the value of writing strong subdivision improvement agreements is affirmed. The easements that are in place, there are some odd ones here and there, and those will have to be addressed when coming up with a plan. But the two most important ones are those north-south corridors of the promenade and the access way. And of course, the Thunder River Theater has to be thought of in the course of any planning of this project. When the public improvements were put in, this project gained 23 parking credits. And because it made improvements that created more parking around the perimeter of the property, the code allows an applicant to offer to make those improvements and in exchange get credits for parking. So what we want to do here is likely to have tight parking. So having that in the back pocket is certainly an asset. There has been a soils report that I was able to review specific to this. Nothing remarkable about it. And it does allow dry wells. As you know, in downtown, there's no stormwater system. So the ability to do dry wells on a property that's going to have a lot of lot coverage is important. And once again, in terms of needs, we have the regional housing study, we have census information, we have the comp plan, and we have the art space study. This is a look at some of the easements that are on the site. I'm not going to go through them all. In an exercise like this, it looks like a ton of land. And then you start taking away, well, there are easements, there's access, there's parking, and all of a sudden it starts to feel smaller. That's a normal part of the process. And when it comes time to start thinking about site plans, I just didn't want you to be surprised when it starts to feel a little bit smaller than you originally might have thought.
Hey, Bob, hold on one second. I'm just noticing Heather's hand. Heather, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering on the access and utility easement that bifurcates, the lots. Are there utilities in that easement, Bob, or just that the easement was located?
That's a question that I have out to Yancey, and I don't have an answer yet.
All right, cool, no problem.
I know the ones on the perimeter got done, but I don't know that is Mark still here? No, Mark's gone.
Okay, that's all, thanks.
So this is, if you look at what HCC zoning requires for commercial development, there's about 850 square feet of frontage. It's subprime. And that's part of the reason why this property has been a challenge. Commercial space along the promenade could be great. It could be vibrant. It could be wonderful, or it could not be. And 6th Street is, there's some potential there. But the draft of the update of the comp plan recognizes that these are not Class A commercial and says, well, maybe we should be a little more flexible when we think about this. But I wanted you to see this is one of the issues related to development on this site. That's a lot of commercial in Carbondale. The minimum would be 21,175. As a practical matter, it will be more than that. but that's quite a bit of absorption of non-prime commercial. In terms of the site assessment,
And
the
Bob,
sites-
we're running a little bit late, so maybe just hit the highlights on this.
There's a portion of the property that's close enough to the Dinkle building to have to go through a historical preservation review. So we would need to keep that in mind. Why hasn't it developed? The amount of subprime commercial space, you take the land cost, the design required by the town center design code and the town code, and the current construction cost per square foot and materials, and you get a product that needs a rent that this property is not currently able to get in the marketplace. The other part of it is parking. We don't allow tandem parking in multifamily. That would solve a lot of problems. So say, well, tandem parking jargon is like in your driveway when you have one car and another one right behind it. We only allow that in single family, duplex and triplex. If it was allowed here, it would go a long way. The second part of that is we only allow 33% of a lot to be covered with parking in the HCC zone district. I've asked before where that came from, and I don't have a real answer as to what the rationale was there. So what does that end up doing in the market? It tells you need to put a $2 million penthouse on the top floor to try and get your money back. Policy questions for the future, the condo association, whether to do it. Right now, there's 2 sets of design guidelines. They even define the height limit differently than the town does. There's promenade responsibilities that I don't know whether the Backbone building and the Equus properties really make sense for them to be involved in. The Backbone building has its own condo association at this time. So in a nutshell, this is a great opportunity. There are some things that need to be dealt with, but creativity will overcome those. And the fact that there's no land costs makes it certainly more likely. Public parking in the future is critical for a vibrant downtown. So somewhere, somehow, I count about 240 spaces on undeveloped commercial land that are going to go away as those properties develop. So what's going to replace those? And then closing, I think for future discussion for the trustees, what would set you up for success is to have a group agreement about a vision of success when this is all done. What does it have to have in order for us to feel like it's a success? What would be nice? What would we like? But we know maybe won't get it all. If it has this, then we've failed. Those are the kind of things that would be able to communicate to potential partners what is in bounds, out of bounds, and second, what kind of partner am I going to be? So development comes with risks, come with reward. So if you want some reward, what's the risk that you're going to take on? It would be easy to just sit here and say, we want a partner to do this and this and this. Well, if you first figure out what you're willing to do and what you're willing to contribute to it, that's going to make you a better partner. And then finally, on the 2 big issues of commercial and parking, saying to your staff, we want to paint between the lines. You do exactly what the code says, and that's the way it is. Or we're going to paint around the lines. If there's something that's alternative compliance in our code, we would be willing to entertain making it work that way, or no lines, which forget the previous approvals and start from scratch. So that is the completion.
A lot of info. Thank you, Bob. And if I understand it correctly, we're going to talk about this again in April, right? Final report. So tonight was really a download of information, so preliminary information, right? Okay. Lauren, did you have something?
I just wanted to ask Bob, do you have a preference for which meeting you may be ready to give a final?
The 26th would be, I don't know, are you doing it a work session or a regular meeting? It would be the 19th if it's a work session.
The 26th is when the new board's going to get sworn in.
So
The
I'll be
19th
here
will be-
whenever you are, except for the 12th.
Okay,
I'm at a hearing in Aspen that night.
let's shoot for the 19th then.
Okay, thank you.
And so that's where we'll, kind of digest this and discuss a process of where do we go from here. But I think the information Bob's put together has been invaluable,
No, that was really good.
almost as valuable as the property itself. All right, thanks again, Bob, for coming. We're running a little bit behind schedule, so I appreciate everybody's patience. Item number 3, we have the Youth and Family Advisory Council. And I see some folks here, so thank you. You guys can feel free to consolidate at the table or speak at the dais, whatever floats your boat. Yeah, go for it, Anna.
I told Anna we never run late. So.
Should have knocked on wood.
Is that okay?
And the folks that are here for the street closure, we have about a half an hour budgeted for this item right here, so.
Maybe we have a couple overview slides, but maybe we could start with introductions. Is that okay? So yes,
Question. Are you signed on to Zoom?
I am. Yep. I
Yeah,
think I'm in there as a Cole.
Anna, since Lauren's new to this, background and introductions would be great.
Got it all. So I am, great. I'm Anna Cole. I'm the Chief of Student and Family Services for the Roaring Fork School District.
I'm Jamie Hayes. I'm the Executive Director at Youth Zone.
I'm Michael Hayes. I'm the Executive Director of Compass. We are the umbrella nonprofit for Carbondale Community School.
Excellent. Thank
And
you.
when you speak, can you pull the microphone close to you so we can get it on the, thank you.
Okay, is that close enough?
Yeah, just tip it towards you.
Yeah,
maybe.
All right, so we are here representing the Carbondale Youth and Family Advisory Council. A little over a year ago, the trustees came to Stepping Stones, Youth Zone, Roaring Fork School District, and the Family Resource Center in the Roaring Fork Schools to kind of grapple with what we could do to support youth and families with tobacco tax revenue. And so what our team brought back was a proposal to actually form a council that would make those decisions and make recommendations to the trustees. And so what happened last winter was we proposed that formation, spent pretty much last year working with partners, and that includes, I'm trying to think of who all has been attending our meetings. So it's Roaring Fork Schools, our independent, both charter schools, Ross and Carbondale Community School have been attending. Valley Settlement's been part of the work. Carbondale Police Department, and a couple other partners kind of come in and out. And we've had roughly monthly meetings. And so our goal for the first year was really to review data and look at the trends and what we're seeing in patterns with kind of how kids and families are doing in town of Carbondale. And then to really use that data to identify initiatives. This winter, we really confirmed the strategic goals for the team and identified a couple initiatives for 2022. So what we want to talk to you today about is those strategic goals and then some of the initiatives and projects that we're proposing to work on with your funding. So 3 big goals, and then we'll break down each one with the particular initiatives within them. So the first is to increase access for families and youth to evidence-based prevention, intervention, and treatment services, both in our Carbondale schools and in our community. The second strategic goal is to increase protective factors. And there's a link, and you guys will remember last year, we really talked kind of about the grounding theories around social services and how we want to move upstream and build protective factors and not just respond to crises. And so we really felt like, given that this was the town's investment in youth and families, when we think of protective factors, we think of them at the individual level, at the community level, at the school level, and family level, that we really wanted to focus this funding on increasing protective factors around the community level, as really thinking about how does a town move the lever on youth wellness. And then we wanted to support professional development around prevention and intervention to youth and family serving folks that are working with kids and families in Carbondale. I think this is yours, Jamie.
All right.
Yeah.
We broke out our goals into some subcommittees, and we really dove in with a lot of our partners who joined the team and just developed some action plans and strategy, and then came back and got feedback from the team and from our youth as well, from the Youth Advisory Council. And then we went back to work and refined, and this is what we've come up with so far. We are working to increase services to produce a resource guide, a youth and family resource guide. All of the information that we pulled was kind of a lot of work for our team to call and find out, what do you do? What resources do you provide? Are they free? Do you have bilingual services? So our goal is to put all of that in a really useful and helpful space for our community in an electronic and interactive format that we hope lives on the town's website as sort of a one-stop shop where you can put what you're looking for, what the age of the youth is, or what the family need is, and then it will pop up or populate what those resources are and whether or not those resources can be scholarship-based or if they're free, or if there are other support services like bilingual services that are available to go alongside that. We are also designing right now a systems summit training for our community. So one of the things that we found and that Kyle brought to the table as he did a lot of work in Denver with a lot of youth and families in Denver, they did these big summit trainings for their communities, because oftentimes what we find is that the resources that are available in our communities, our families and our youth and our adults who are working with youth don't often know what is the system for access and what exactly are the services provided that are already right here at our fingertips. So we'll do a little trial summit. Did we decide on this summer to try one? And then we'll give it a go, see how it feels. And then we'll do it again in the fall, and we'll launch with a broader community with all of our school professionals back and our health professionals and our police department and anyone really who is youth facing in the town of Carbondale. We're also looking at utilizing some of the funding to develop an emergency backup fund that is readily available at all times for youth who need access to increased mental health services and substance use intervention support. And the last one, and then I'll kick the other one to Michael, is just thinking thoughtfully all the time about removing some of those other barriers for other youth-facing organizations like our schools and Stepping Stones and other organizations that have youth all the time to provide things like RAFTA passes so that we can just get kids really easily to where they need to get to if transportation is also a barrier. And I'll kick the grant over to Michael here.
You guys know that RAFTA did lower its fares to $1 everywhere for kids. Just making sure.
And then number 4, as you can read, is the concept. We developed the concept of a multi-year large grants to support nonprofit organizations and schools in Carbondale that would align and link back to the 3 goals associated with these dollars. And really that we landed on the 3-year piece because these large grants would be tied into initiatives, into personnel, and into supporting programs within the town of Carbondale. Really very much oriented towards organizations and schools. So a teacher wouldn't apply for this grant, but individuals in schools, organizations and schools would. That grant process would live as a community grant on the town website. And then the grant application, which we have a draft of, would then be, those applications would be reviewed by the council.
Okay, our next goal is really around increasing the community protective factors. And when you look at protective factors for youth in communities, it's a lot about, do kids feel like they belong in their community, and where do they feel like they have voice and ownership? And I think one of our questions as a bunch of adults was like, well, we don't we don't really know how kids feel about living in Carbondale. And so we have a youth advisory council. Stepping Stones is facilitating that. Your funding is helping to support that group. But we wanted a little bit more targeted information about the town. And so what we're going to propose is to put out an RFP to youth serving organizations, teams, clubs. We think this might be a great fundraiser for a soccer team, where we would ask kids to basically take a map of Carbondale and highlight places where they feel welcome and that they belong, and to talk a little bit about why. I think for us, a couple places come to mind. Stepping Stones, of course, that's the purpose of Stepping Stones. But if you pay attention, Sopris Park is a place that feels really welcoming to kids, and they feel safe and they hang out there. Pepinos is a really great, safe place for kids. They feel welcome. They feel like they belong. And so we also, in an additional way, also want to find out where are the places where kids don't feel like they belong or they feel unsafe in the community. How can we identify those places and then try to learn more from youth? How can we strengthen this community? How can we highlight those organizations and community organizations that are creating a safe place for kids, and really make that visible, both to support the organizations in town that are doing that make that, decision to say, we're not going to stress a couple of, 12 and 13-year-olds that come in here after school and hang out. How can we really celebrate and support those organizations that are making Carbondale a really youth-friendly place? I also think of the library, as some of these really key hot spots where kids feel like they belong. So we want to get some more information from kids on that to really guide our understanding of how kids feel like they belong in Carbondale, so that we can strengthen that with this funding. And then we also want to continue to support and sustain the Youth Advisory Council at Stepping Stones, which so far, and it's too bad that we can get more from that council and have them come talk to you guys. It's been a little bit more of a drop-in with Stepping Stones of who kind of shows up and does some work. And, I think they're waiting for more to sink their teeth into. They want to review the grants. They want to look at maps. So we're hoping to do a little bit more with those guys as there becomes more work that's happening. I think this is our last goal.
And our final goal around professional development, we set out to provide a series of three opportunities for adults who serve kids in our communities to learn about substance and the impact on the adolescent brain, about trauma and adolescent brain development, and then also youth mental health first aid, both with youth, groups of youth, and with groups of adults who serve youth also. We have done one of those so far. Stepping Stones hosted the first. 19 local professionals came from all different organizations. There was great feedback around that. This summer, we'll provide the full series of 3, sort of do a test pilot of how many people come. All of the courses will be in English and in Spanish. So we have an English presenter and a Spanish presenter as well. Bilingual presentation staff. And we've got a lot of people who are excited to come and share their perspective and their expertise, especially as it relates to youth and positive development of youth, and helping our adults understand more what's going on with our kids and how it impacts the way that they interact in their community in both healthy and not so healthy ways.
And finally, a little specifics on your investment. We were going off of about a $250,000-ish budget. And so this is kind of what we're thinking at first crack of trying to really execute and implement those initiatives. You can see the specifics here that build up to that total request. Yeah, so we can stop there. Questions, thoughts?
Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming tonight, and we'll see you again in April for a more detailed, but I'm just really grateful. I think as I sort of pass the baton with this opportunity, to me, I think what's so incredibly valuable and is articulated in the slides you guys just presented is there doesn't seem to be easy funding for this type of work elsewhere. And why it's one of the reasons why I felt like our nicotine tax was so appropriate to devote to this. Thanks to y'all's efforts, it's a unique collaboration between experts. I think all the entities represented really have a unique ability to address these needs. And we're able to have that flexibility with something like this. And the goals and outcomes that you've laid out, I can't think of better ones, and they're so desperately needed. So I'm pretty excited about this, and I hope it can continue. But just thank you for this update. Any questions, concerns? The idea is that they'll come back in April with a little bit more detailed information. But yeah, Lonnie.
Yeah, thank you. It was an impressive amount of work that you guys have done in a very short period of time. And I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to come visit with you on site at your different locations to understand better, since I've not had kids in school here. So it really gave me a good individual orientation to what the community's issues are and what you're trying to get ahead of. So thank you for that.
All right. Thank you very much.
This is awesome. Thanks for all your hard work.
Yep. All right. It is, geez, I can't even see the time now without my glasses. All right, it is 7:20. Let's take a 6-minute break and we'll come back and talk about street closures. Okay. So, sounds like there's been some compromise. We'll see. We'll see how far it goes.
Yeah, that's the piece that we're most excited about.
on our cool interactive budget online. What are total projections? And then we want. Don't support us. Yeah, well, last I'm impressed. Okay. So I have no, actually. All right.
Uh-oh, some people are getting bored. All right, we are on to item number 4, which is our street closure discussion. I thought, oops, sorry, my mic wasn't on. We're on to item number 4, street closure discussion. I thought I'd give a little bit of background before we get going. Some have asked, why are we discussing this? COVID's more or less over. And I just wanted to state that we're attempting to learn from COVID in the pandemic, just like we've learned a lot of different lessons. And I think some feel strongly about different things. And I personally thought it was better to have a community discussion rather than kind of sweep it under the rug and say, no, let's not talk about it. So I appreciate everybody's willingness to talk about it. There's been a lot of great collaboration. It sounds like there's been several attempts to get various businesses to talk on different things. There's been a little bit of emotion too, which is not uncommon in this line of work. And I think we have ears for both. And so tonight is really our opportunity to listen. So while I ask you to be respectful, if you've got to be emotional too, do what you need to do. But ultimately, we're here to seek common agreement, which I bet we're closer to than we think. Admittedly, I was disappointed to see the petition at first, just because I worried that could be a little divisive. But recently, we talked about short-term rentals, and that whole process really, there was a ballot initiative, which I also was disappointed to see, but it got us off the dime and it got us talking about the issue. So maybe the petition was the catalyst we needed. But I will say that I think I speak for the board to say we're pretty proud of how the short-term rental discussion went. And by the end of that discussion, both sides said, we're pleased with how things wound up. So I'm optimistic we can be in the same place with Main Street closures. So tonight, like I said, the primary purpose for tonight is to hear from the public. Depending on how things go, we may or may not discuss solutions or not. I think it's fair to assume that we've read the emails. I'm pretty sure every one of us appreciate the value of First Friday and getting together on Main Street. So I think there's a general understanding that you can assume we have. I thought if possible, if there's anyone who wants to speak, I'm going to call it the petition group, since that is really what started this conversation. If there's anyone from the petition group who wants to speak and make some opening comments, go for it. And then I thought I'd let the group that differs from the petition group speak. And then we can open it up to individuals as we normally do with 3 minutes a pop. I'm guessing 3 minutes, depending on how many people, but it looks like it's relatively light. And to be clear, it's a work session tonight. So even if we wanted to make a decision, we can't. So it's really about listening and maybe some talking about solutions at the end. So with that, is there anyone who wants to make some opening comments again for the petition group? Okay, is that Kat? Okay. And Kat, you can either. Okay, you can either sit at the table or the dais, whatever. And if you would just
the speaky thing.
give us your name.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Kat Rich. For those of you who do not know me, I am the chair of Carbondale Arts Board. Also a former staff member of Carbondale Arts, 30-year resident of the Valley and 4th generation native of Colorado. I'm here with Michael Stout, who is our education director and also a member of our creative district committee. We are here today because we appreciate the town taking the time to have this discussion yet again. Obviously, this is an important part of the economic health of our community. We realize there are divisions on both sides. But we also feel that there needs to be some clarification, at least for Carbondale Arts' role in this process. We do appreciate you opening up this conversation. Most grateful to the town trustees, also to the community for listening to this conversation. It's really important. We're grateful to live in a community that values open process, and we believe in working with everyone is the best way to find the best solutions for our community that benefit everybody directly and have the greatest impact. We feel, though, that we do need to clarify something. As Carbondale Arts, we are the administration of the Carbondale Creative District. And as part of that, we're genuinely interested in the success of all the businesses in our downtown. Carbondale Arts does not have an official stance on the street closure. As administrators of the Carbondale Creative Districts and valued and important members of our community, the only stake we have is to see increased pedestrian spaces as a way to help our community thrive. But we would never want that to create obstacles for any business to be successful, nor would we want this discussion to turn into a divisive, horrible, icky conversation. Specific street closure details aside, we as an organization are here to listen and support the community as a whole to explore ways to drive increased economic vitality, pedestrian vibrancy, and foster creative solutions to that end. While we saw an outpouring of community support, over 400 people for the idea of street closures, we also recognize that this proposal as it stands is conceptual and it will require more discussion. It is not in any way intended to cause division. Rather, it is to facilitate a conversation that is respectful and beneficial in a manner to everyone who participates. Carbondale Arts is about connecting people, and our hope for this process is that it will be handled in the spirit of community and collaboration. This is an important conversation, and we want to see everyone benefit from increased pedestrian spaces, increased economic activity, and we want to minimize any inconvenience to residents and businesses. We know there's a lot of options, there's a lot of opinions, and we as an organization and as community leaders would like very much to explore what works for everyone. We respectfully appreciate the town trustees' time in this matter. We respectfully appreciate the community members' time in this matter, but we also ask that it be viewed as impartially and respectfully and as beneficially to everyone as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kat.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Michael?
Do you have anything to add?
No, I would just echo those sentiments. And again, we appreciate, I think your opening remarks really framed it well, and look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right. And I had reached out, wasn't really sure who the right spokesperson was, but Ryan said he was willing to make some comments, so.
I don't know if I'm right either, but I'm. Right.
Yeah,
I don't.
Ryan, if you would just give us your name for the record.
Ryan Sweeney. I'm owner of Brass Anvil on 348 Main Street. And I do have permission from a lot of the people in this room here in the downtown business community to speak on their behalf. I would say the strong majority of business owners on my block of Main Street and a lot of vocal business owners in the downtown business community. So yeah, I mean, like we saw that petition that went around, and we are strongly in favor of so much of that. The idea of having a safe pedestrian friendly downtown, the idea of having a space to have activations and events to bring people to downtown. But our opposition comes with closing just one block of Main Street. It seems really unfair. And that's something that, you know, it started 2 years ago about this time when COVID came around, and we had 3 of our neighboring businesses come to us and say, we're not going to survive COVID unless we can expand our dining area. There are restrictions on capacity. There are restrictions on how close tables can be together. And we as a business community came together and said, we don't want to see anybody fail. So we will allow the street to be closed, make that sacrifice for our neighbors so that they can expand out into the street, have seating and survive. And they did. And then last year, the same thing happened, even though the COVID restrictions weren't really there anymore. And we saw those businesses being very successful in those spaces in the street at the detriment to the surrounding businesses. Retail on our block is harmed by it, by closing down the street. We have 3 businesses on our block that rely on get in, get out, drop off type operation who need parking right in front of their business. And then also all of Main Street, the restaurants and bars who felt that it was unfair to create a space and more dining space for patrons on one block of a very few restaurants, and they felt at their expense. So when we saw the petition come up, you know, the one actionable item in that petition was the same closure of the same block as Main Street. So, you know, all the things that we stand for in the petition and we can get behind 100% as a community, that one thing is where our opposition lies. And we really do believe that we have come together and got great solutions for everything that don't involve the closure of Main Street. We think that we've solved all the goals of the petition without that. So I can try and run through those things, or if it's question time, we can try and bite this in little chunks or whatever. I don't know how you guys want me to proceed.
No, I think now is a good time to.
Okay. So one of the things that we're looking for is to restore the 2014 resolution for the deck space. We believe that's really fair and equitable for every bar and restaurant to be allowed the same amount of square footage to build a deck, which is, you know, largely safe. It's a structure in the parking lane. I believe it's 25 feet by 9 feet. Everybody gets the same amount of space you can put in front of your business. That's worked well in the past for years and years and years. Another thing that we want to talk about is closure on Main Street. We want that to obviously stay in effect for First Friday, for Mountain Fair, for holidays. But we'd like to see if it's possible to do it for the length of Main Street and not kind of cherry pick a few blocks and have those be the activity center and then the other blocks be kind of left out and remain open to traffic. So we'd like to see that a little bit more equitable. We're a little bit divided on whether we want to see speed bumps in Main Street. Obviously, safety is something that we can all get behind. That's not a contentious topic at all. Some people feel that whatever it takes to slow down traffic, speed bumps might be a good idea. Other people feel that we already have a stop sign at every intersection on Main Street. It might not be necessary, and possibly things like the horse trailers for the rodeo. Some of our delivery vehicles might not appreciate the speed bump. So that's a point that we've got. And then one of the big ones is we actually feel that we have a space for those activations, the art, the music, the things that we all are in 100% agreement that we want brought to downtown. And that's 4th Street. in between Main and Garfield, where the farmer's market is, that space seems great. And it's not interrupting with any traffic patterns. There are no businesses on that street. Carbondale Arts is right there. The new park that the town has acquired is right there. That seems like a great space to expand and have these activations and have these, things that bring the community together. And then when those are over, everybody disperses equally out onto Main Street, onto businesses at this end and this end, and yes, on the 300 block. But it just seems a lot more fair to do those things in that area rather than closing down one block, at the benefit of a few businesses and the detriment of a lot of businesses. So I think that's basically our stance. And again, I'm trying to speak for a lot of people, so I'm generalizing these points that we've come together on. But not everyone might agree with me 100% on what we've talked about. But for the most part, we who are not in favor of closing Main Street, those are some things we'd like to talk about and we'd like to see.
Thank you, Ryan. We're going to turn it over to the public and let folks speak, but we may bring it back for dialogue. Yeah.
I don't want to mess up our protocol. I just wonder if it's okay if we ask a clarifying question.
Sure, go for it.
Thank you for all that. Just to clarify, you expressed an interest in expanding the closure to more of Main Street during First Fridays, because it sounds like that would be
right. We have
benefiting everybody.
We have businesses at ends of the street that are not included in the closure. And it's almost like, the larger point here of closing one block is creating a space of vibrancy that a few businesses occupy. And it might draw people to that at the expense of people who are not included in that. So we believe that would be fair if possible. We know RAFTA has a say in this, to on First Friday, get the entire business district, the entire length of Main Street included in that closure and not just a few blocks in the center of town.
Okay. I was just clarifying because it sounds like on one end, to the businesses that you're representing in your own, the more frequent closure of one block is a detriment to your business. but
Yes.
The First Friday closure is a benefit to your business. So
I think it's more about fairness. The first Friday Mountain Fair, there's just a necessity for it. There's so much foot traffic brought to town that we understand completely that you cannot have cars driving through. There's people consuming alcohol. It's just a bad idea to have that many pedestrians with the road open. So we're just saying on the nights when it's necessitated like that, to make it a little bit fair and not kind of have, the party blocks and then have the businesses, restaurants and bars at the other ends of it excluded from that. So that's.
Thanks, Ryan.
Okay.
So what we'll do is, will you raise your hand if you're interested in speaking? Okay, so there's not a ton of people. And even if everybody online wants to talk, let's do our usual 3 minutes. And if you would just give us your name, tell us where you're from. You don't need to give us your exact address. And we'll start listening. Lynn, looks like you're up first.
Thank you. Lynn Kirschner from 711 Main Street at the other end of town. Thank you for hearing us out. Couple of points brought me to the streets this week, talking to people. The petition was interesting and seeing who signed, who didn't sign, whatever. So I went to people that had signed. And it was interesting because I came across 4 people. The first 4 people I spoke to that I knew were not aware of any opposition to closing the street. And they were somewhat, knowing that, would you have still signed the petition? No, of course not. I want my community to be whole. So I just wanted to point that out, that there might be a number of signers on the petition, but I don't really think the number speaks for the informed signatures on the petition. The second point I'd like to bring up with regards to speed bumps. Speed bumps take a lot of work to maintain. And they do effectively sometimes slow traffic, but more than enough. And speaking to 3 of the rancher families in the valley, they are totally opposed to speed bumps down their main street, hauling trailers, talk to contractors. They don't like, you can slow down. One of the thoughts that was brought to me was, we have the creative district. We have a lot of artisans here in the pedestrian areas where there are heavy pedestrian activity. Let's make some creative artistic signs that are, please slow down, love your pedestrians. something creative instead of speed bumps, which is a little cold and hard, no pun intended. And last but not least, by any means, it's been interesting to see effective communication and how the old game of telephone happens. And where one person will whisper something in someone's ear, and by the time it gets around this table, it's something totally different. So bringing it back to effective communication, being clear and concise, I think is really important. And the other thing we've got going on here, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, but 133 versus Main Street is already happening. And Main Street as a group, we need to collectively come together and work together to promote downtown Main Street. And that is just that we're even here. I work with people all the time that are not from here. And I'm here to tell you, quite a few of those people don't even know there's a downtown. They thought the main drag on 133 was Carbondale. And they were shocked to find out that there's actually a downtown. So one of the things I'd like to see happen as a result of this gathering is that we all put our heads together and come up with some cohesive plan to collectively promote what we have, put a map in a magazine and note who's here, what we do and what we do on special occasions. So my points, and I appreciate your time and look forward to people working together because that's what the heart of Carbondale is about. Thank you.
Lynn. All right, I think what we'll do is we'll do what we did before. We'll take 4 people from the audience and then 4 people to Zoom. So if you're on Zoom and you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. But in the meantime, is there someone else who'd like to speak? Go ahead. Yep, Amy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Charters from Lulubelle at 320 Main Street. And first of all, I just want to say, as divisive as this issue has been over, we're going into the 3rd year now. We made some real progress, like significant progress, and opened a lot of communication lines in the past, I would say 2 weeks even. And you know, there are a lot of emotions and it's heated and everybody is in this for their business and community and everything. But I think what the real turn of events, I would say, really happened within the last like 20 hours. And we really thought we had a consensus and we were sitting at the same table and we were excited about what was coming forward. And then it was like land blast after land blast every 4 hours. I'm like, oh my God, how are we all supposed to actually work? Like, this is insane, the amount of conversations going on, emails, whatever. And I think we have some great solutions and I think we can move forward positively. I do feel like the trust is broken. And I feel like today it was broken amongst many of us on different sides of the table on this issue. One of the biggest ones or hardest things for me to swallow is sort of at the 11th hour, right before this meeting started, we had Carbondale Creative come out saying they weren't behind this petition, that this was not their name on it, that it was individual people and as citizens, not as an organization. And that is very differently reflected on social media and has been for the last few weeks. So for the people, the businesses on the other side, we're calling it now, that weren't part of the petition originally, we're still really confused about who started it, what it truly is about, whether it's a private citizen or an organization or a nonprofit or whatever it may be. It's great that it began like a talking point and got people to come together and communicate. It's not great that 20 minutes before this meeting, an hour before this meeting, the information of where it came from changed. That to me is not transparent. That is not working together. That is not communicating as a team. So I would appreciate for the community to understand where that really did come from and who is behind it. And let's talk, but let's not hide behind organization names or then private emails separately saying, no, it was me as a citizen putting it out there. Let's own up to what it's about and let's have a real honest conversation about it. And stand up, if you're gonna put your stake in the ground, stand behind it and let's talk about it and be adults about it and quit the slandering and quit the insults and quit the bullshit, quite frankly, that's been going on. Like, let's
Amy,
just talk.
Try and keep your comments focused on Main Street closures, just to keep it, that's ultimately what
But
we're here.
the
is-
petition is about Main Street closure. So that's my
I
point.
understand, but
But I just would like really for us to all grow up and have legit conversations and own up to what we're representing and do it fairly, I guess.
thank
So,
you, Amy.
Thanks.
Okay, two more from the audience. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Hi, folks. I'm Greg Forbes. I live at 350 Garfield. So basically just one block over from Main Street over there. And I guess I just wanted to kind of put it out there to speak for some of the residents that have been kind of impacted over the last couple of years regarding the street closure. And I guess to preface it first, I'd say that we're very grateful that the street has been closed. We have a young child that, he wasn't able to be vaccinated until more recently. And it was a big deal for us to be able to dine outside. And we took the impacts that went along with that to where we lived and felt like it was a reasonable situation. Basically, I guess my concern at this point is more along the lines of that because of the fact that this started regarding COVID, this longer term street closure, not just the occasional First Fridays kind of a thing, but this where we were doing it multiple nights a week, every week for a good portion of the year. It felt like this was, as a response to COVID, it was pretty seat of the pants, that basically there wasn't a whole lot of thought into, well, what are the impacts? How do we mitigate the impacts? What are the best ways to deal with all the parties that are being impacted? It was just kind of like, okay, well, here's COVID. We want these restaurants to survive. Let's just do this and we'll work it out. And, for the most part, it worked. But I think it could work a whole lot better if it's going to be done in the future through thinking about what the goals really are. Specifically for my side of things and my neighbor's side of things, goals being, what are the goals as far as traffic? Because you look at Main Street, and the reason that we close Main Streets is because there's a massive amount of cars that go through during peak hours. I mean, both directions, it's peak hours, it's nonstop. It's a steady stream of traffic that never, ever stops. And we did this detour where we put a sign up that says, go this way, go around. And in some situations it works. We live on Garfield right there, where basically, if you picture it, you block off Main Street where it's been blocked off. You go left or you go right. The detour says go left, and that way you go around and you do more of the main streets that have street lights and have sidewalks. And to my mind, it seems like that's the goal, is for traffic to go that way. But the problem is that people go the path of least resistance. And so basically, if you're coming up Valley, you're going to turn left or you're going to turn right. You're going to turn right because it's easier. So on Garfield, we have no street lights, we have no sidewalks, and we have parking on both sides of the street. They're angled parking. So it narrows it down quite a bit. And we end up in a situation where my office is in the front of the house, so I sit there quite a bit during that early dinner hour. And I mean, it is nonstop traffic down the street. And I mean, it's sketchy because it's just way, way more than a side street like that is capable of dealing with, was designed to deal with, is supposed to deal with. So my thought is, if we're going to do this, let's think about where do we really want the traffic to go? Is the idea that it gets dispersed everywhere around town? Or is it the idea that it goes on a specific route? And if the idea is it goes on a specific route, how do we get the cars to do that? And yeah.
Craig, if you could just wind your comments down, it's.
Okay.
That'd be good.
That's pretty much the gist of it. So I'd say if the idea is to do this, let's do some real planning and figure out the best way to do it rather than just the easiest way to do it.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate those comments. Okay, one more from the audience. Yep. And until we switch to Zoom, we can come back if there's more, but Carrie.
Gary Shanks, Marble Distilling.
You can put that mic up for you tall guys.
Like up or sort of. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I want to touch on some things that I heard in the room, and then I'm going to finish with some things that happened in the last day, and I'm just kind of usurping your time to use the public forum to clarify what I think has been a misinterpretation. So I really appreciate the vehemence and the emotion that Amy's putting into her comments. And I feel some of those things. I think we all do. But I think she brings up some really good points. I think Ryan speaks for the majority of those businesses that feel like they are financially harmed when you close the 300 block for long periods of time. Addressing the mayor, but to Ben's idea, in no way, shape, or form does anybody want to get rid of First Friday. In no way, shape, or form does anybody think that a robust and friendly downtown core where you can walk around and see your friends and the kids are biking. Who the hell does not want that? In fact, I think Marble, where it stands to gain the least of the compromise that I just said, well, I'm fully vested. And my wife told me that I had to be, she's a CEO, but we are fully vested with what Ryan is putting on the table and support him as the speaker of that group. And that idea of fourth, where it will potentially harm us, we think it's a great compromise going forward, because as Lynn said, really the elephant in the room is 133 is getting a really tremendous amount of investment, time and energy from the town with infrastructure, as it should. But for as long as I've been in this town, and I started in 1990, left for a while, came back, there's never been wayfinding to know about a historic commercial core, and it still exists. And that's okay. We've got really cool phones that tell us where to go and what to do and what time for Marty to take his meds. But I will end on this. My wife and I penned a letter to Ally and Chase at Batch. And we did that of our own accord. And we did that under the auspices of, I had spoken with some trustees who got in touch with Ally. She was nice enough to get in touch with us. And we began a dialogue. And we met for about 3.5 hours on Saturday. And we came up with bullet points and really roughed them up and talked quite candidly about, this is going to be a sticking point, or this is going to blow up in everybody's face. This is a compromise that can work. And we agreed we would take those back to everybody, some in this room, some not, and negotiate. And that's what we did. We got back on the phone. We talked about it some more. And at the 11th hour, we penned this letter to be very direct, very business oriented, no bullshit, excuse my language, and say, we are in support of B. You are insisting on this one that we have very good intel that is going to create real turmoil. I apologize on behalf of myself and my wife for putting a metaphor into a letter that I'm not sure I understand where people don't get metaphors. I beg anybody to, wrap it up. Haven't said I'm going to war over this one. Well, it doesn't mean I'm going to pull out a gun and run down Main Street. It means I'm passionate about what I'm talking about, and I'm going to fight for my financial viability in what is a very significant investment. With that, I'm apologizing for somebody taking up the idea that we were threatening them or threatening to take away money from the town. I don't have time to go into how much money we give. So I appreciate the time to speak. I appreciate Ryan and whomever else will come from the other side to try to make this work. We're solely in support of it all along the way. So thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. All right. Is there anyone on the Zoom, in our Zoom audience who'd like to address the board? I'm not seeing any hands. No hands. Okay, we'll go back to the audience. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak tonight? Wow. What do we do?
One more thing?
What do we do? No, sorry, Corey. Carrie.
It has nothing to do with
Nope.
that.
Carrie. That turns into chaos. All right, nobody else? Really? Okay. So, well, thank you, everybody, for speaking.
I think somebody wants to speak.
Yeah, Amy, go for it.
Hi, my name is Amy Yanes. I am a resident here in Carbondale. I do not own a business. I believe that vibrancy is what makes Carbondale the way it is. And I understand that there are two sides to every story. However, I feel that you can't say that you support vibrancy in this town and not support the creative district and what they're trying to do. That's their sole purpose. Is to bring people together and have people enjoying our community. During the pandemic, I have enjoyed eating outside and drinking outside at so many restaurants here in town. I made it a point to do it every single week at least one to try to help my friends and their businesses survive during the pandemic. And honestly, the worst part about the situation last summer was having to sit outside and eat outside and smell diesel fumes as I was doing so. On the nights when the street was closed, it was a pleasant experience where so many people could walk up and down the street and stop and say hello and just bring that sense of community back to us. And when the street is not closed, it's not the same thing. It actually feels dangerous sitting out at some of those patios where the cars are right up against you. So I would just like you guys to all consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Hillary.
Hi, I'm Hillary Back, and I own a business on 20 North 4th Street. And I just want to say that I think in the spirit of compromise, we can come up with a plan that will suit everyone. And I do love First Friday myself, and it's a special event. And I think part of what makes it so much fun and why everyone comes out is that it is special. And I can tell you, being that my alley is right there and I drive in and out of that alley, I often would leave in the middle of the week to, just see what's going on Main. And it's not that busy on a Wednesday and Thursday night that I think that the seating needed to be extended into the street. And I feel like we can have it where maybe we can create some sort of tables where we can allow for liquor license on 4th. I mean, there are things that we can do to make it where people could potentially, get their food and hang out in the street, but it doesn't necessarily have to be Main Street. So there are options that I think we can think outside the box. So let's just keep searching.
Okay. Thank you, Hillary. Okay. Because this is a work session, sometimes we'll have a roundtable discussion, but there's a couple things. one, if there's a specific response, I don't want to shut down discussion, but we do need to capture it on the microphone. So we'll see how the conversation goes. I'm still not seeing any hands on Zoom. So we'll effectively close the public comment and bring it back for discussion. And Lauren handed out what she thought captured the ideas out there. Ryan articulated a specific proposal. But first, I suppose I'll see, is there any questions from trustees on kind of what we're being asked? Yeah, Ben.
Thanks everybody for all that, and all the emails and everything. One thing I'd like to have that I don't have at my fingertips, but maybe for our next meeting, is our schedule of street closures for the year. That, Marty, were you on that task force this year? I think you usually.
You can get it from Eric.
Yeah, I could probably dig into some packets on the computer over the next few minutes, but I think that might be helpful for us to look at and see, look at it in that context of all the different times that the streets are or aren't closed and which blocks, because that includes obviously the First Friday closure, but also some Fourth Street closures, I think. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's.
Some First Fridays are, don't go as far as Snowmass Drive or Second Street, okay, and some do.
And do you remember does anybody remember, just to add context, are there any other closures of Main or of just Fourth? In my mind, there's closures of Fourth, but I know that that's the farmer's market.
Yeah, for farmers market,
Potato Days.
Cowboy Up,
Okay.
Cypress Music Fest, I think.
On Fourth and Main.
Yeah, at least a
Like
half a
just
dozen.
Fourth.
Fourth between Main and Garfield.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'd just like to see, like, as we discuss potential other closures of some part of Main or some part of Fourth, to see how that would fit in with that schedule. And I didn't think of that till now, or I would have asked for it before.
Okay. Erica?
Kind of following up on what Hillary just brought up, I had made a note to remind myself, or maybe we can get information from, I think it was Michelle and Andrea who looked into the common consumption rules. I think that was it, where we had to block off certain areas and then booze could travel out of a restaurant or from a deck in that area. And I don't know if there's any, I know it got really complicated. I think the chamber or the tourism council was going to take it on. And then it ended up being
They looked into it and it was.
super complicated.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's changed because it's still the same. Yeah.
I think the most complicated thing about it was that you had to have a board of directors, like
Oh,
a
right.
dedicated board of directors, not just like, oh yeah, we have a board of directors. You really have to have one. They have to meet, they have minutes, that whole thing. And nobody really wanted to take that on.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So that was the biggest deterrent.
Yeah. And I remember they had to also have some sort of way to mark the cup or something. So that
But
you
during
knew-
COVID, that was, it was the same rule for COVID. So if
Okay.
people were selling it to go, they would already have that.
Okay.
Another big
Got it.
issue was the exits. You really had to guard and make sure that you didn't have exits, like Snowmass Mall. It's really designed for it because there's only certain places where you can leave Snowmass Mall.
Mhm.
So it really was problematic.
Mhm. So we'd have to have a chain link fence from the restaurants.
With barbed wire.
Just kidding. Okay.
And Kathy, there was, a request to restore the 2014 resolution, but I mean, that's still in effect, right? If we do nothing, that's still in effect.
Well, I think the point of that was that the 2014 resolution requires decks. And the last 2 years, I think that sort of fell by the wayside from what I've heard as far as, being able to set up tables in the street as opposed to having a formal deck.
Right.
I think that's why that's written on here this way.
Just to clarify, the way I understood understand it is we allowed those exceptions in the last 2 years. So if we do nothing, the 2014 resolution still binds or still, okay. Okay.
Could we follow just another question?
Yep.
on that? Kathy, refresh my memory on the decks. What's the time frame there? Is it from May 1st?
To October 15th.
Okay.
So one of the issues with the decking is they have to get a modification of premises and their time is kind of running out. And I've asked them to hold off because so it's $150 per way and you have to do it twice to modify it and then take your modification back. So the state is very particular on the drawings of the before and after, what you give them, and that's what you get. So if you change it again, then you would do another modification. So I didn't know which way you guys were gonna go, so I've just asked them to hold off. But their time is now, not putting any pressure on you, but their time is ticking because the state's really backlogged with their liquor licenses, and to get a liquor license modification for May 1st is gonna, I told them to all be ready with 4 different plans of the way it could go when you guys make your decision, when you all make your decision.
That's
So,
good to know.
yeah.
Thank you for that. So, yeah, sounds like time is of the essence for that particular one. And that, so what we would, on that particular item is, are we going to modify specifically that resolution and dining permitted on Main Street? So we could, yeah, okay,
So two different topics.
yeah. Marty?
Yeah, when I first saw this petition on Facebook, it said it was about artistic vitality, outdoor dining, street closure, and the Environmental Bill of Rights, all 4 things. And the emails we've gotten, I think a lot of people have thought that it was just about dining, and some people thought it was just about the Environmental Bill of Rights, and some people thought it was just about artistic vitality, and some people thought it was just about street closure. I think it's important enough, especially if we want to take all 4 things into consideration, that at least for this year, we should think, and I'm not speaking for the board, I'm just speaking for myself, think about keeping the 2014 resolution in place. Hopefully, whether it's the Downtown Merchants Association or with further talk among the parties involved, come up with a Carbondale collaborative attitude on how we could achieve all those goals. There are lots of things. There should be signs at the roundabout pointing people to Main Street. There should be a sign on 133 pointing people to Carbondale. And these are things, all these businesses can get together and it's for the betterment of everyone. If you want to take 4th to Garfield and put a flea market in there Saturday afternoons, or put an autistic group in there, a flash mob or whatever, that is great. But you guys need to work this out. I'd rather there not be winners and losers. I'd rather that the whole town wins. So I would throw it back in your court. And so you should be able to, as adults with businesses and with nonprofits, work together to achieve a common goal, to make Carbondale more vibrant, to make downtown not only easier to access, but that more people know about it. First Friday came about because a group of people got together, and I believe CCAH, the forerunner of Carbondale Arts, was one of the instigating forces behind it. Get together, work something out, find activities that are going to bring more people downtown, but are not going to threaten anyone's business. And with that, I've had my say.
Thank you, Marty. If we can say something.
No, I can wait.
So I'm looking at Lauren's summary, and my notes from our speakers. And I see, I mean, if we try and really boil it down, there's 3 issues. There's Main Street dining, there's Main Street closures, and there's speeding. I would just as soon postpone any kind of speeding discussion, and I strongly advise us against speed bumps. There's other things that can be done, and we don't need to decide that right now. With respect to Main Street dining, seems like there's kind of 2 choices. We either go back to 2014 or we allow additional dining like we did last year, with or without decks. And then with respect to Main Street closure, there's the boundaries of it, there's the dates, and there's the times. Am I missing anything? Or, yeah.
Well, I'd like to speak to the point of traffic calming, just because I think it's to me, it's a huge issue. I mean, I see traffic just, you know, to the point of like Cameron Craig's point. I mean, there's just honestly, traffic just zooms down Main Street to the point where there's no stop sign at 2nd and Main. They go right past Marble, right past Fat Belly without having to stop. I mean, we have a stretch of a mile long Main Street with, to me, not enough traffic calming to actually get people. You talk about wanting people to slow down when they drive by your businesses. They're going 20, 25 miles an hour, sometimes more. And honestly, I think that's where, to me, like, you guys need to find that common ground. And I think that's one area that everybody can agree on. I mean, all these businesses are fighting the same challenges, labor shortages, increasing prices, you know, and rather than getting so divisive when it comes to this, I think there's areas you can find common ground. And that is one I think everyone can get behind. So.
Good catch, Luis. I didn't mean to overstate that. So with traffic calming, there's on Main Street, but that sounds like that's an issue no matter what we do with closures. And off of Main Street, it depends on what we do with Main Street closures. So that's kind of why I left that off, because we may or may not make those changes. So I didn't mean to forget about you, Greg. Okay. Let's dig into the dining, because that's the most urgent one. So what we did in the previous 2 years is we not only allowed people to have more than their one space, but we allowed them to dine right on the street without a deck. Anybody feel strongly one way or the other? Yeah.
I don't know if I feel strongly, but I think seems like going back to the original space size would work. And I haven't had anybody, doesn't seem like in any of the comments, anybody's asked for additional space in that way. It does seem like the deck or no deck has worked. And I really liked how we had additional businesses be able to kind of pop up outdoor dining, whether that was Pepino's, Bonfire, Fat Belly. If they want to do a deck, they can. But I don't know if we would need to require it. And we still have those barriers that we could still loan out. Like, they don't need to collect dust anywhere. So I know they're not gorgeous. I don't know if they add vibrancy, but.
So Erica, sorry, I was kind of following up notes. So are you saying that you're not, did I hear you say there isn't a demand to increase the square footage, but
Not that I've heard. If other
Okay.
people have heard differently, then by all means.
but you're open to the idea of not requiring the deck?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Anybody else feel?
If I missed somebody's comment or email to that effect.
There was a reason why that deck requirement was put in. It was, my understanding it was so that water could flow underneath the deck.
But I think, I mean,
Go ahead.
I
Well-
just think it worked with the barriers that we have. So I'm
Well,
open to.
okay, there's some
continuing
problems with that.
but-
First of all, whenever it rains, well, that's street closure, so I won't even go there.
Yeah. I'm not-
But I think it isn't fair to the businesses that have been required and have put up decks at their own expense to comply with our 2014 resolution, such as Fat Thai or Allegria, or Allegria, however you pronounce it. You know, they've had decks built, they've had it for years. And that was meeting our requirements. So now we're saying Don't worry about that.
Wait, no. Erica's just saying she's open to that. We are not saying anything.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why I'm wondering. I'm just trying to understand.
Yes, that is what I am saying.
Okay. I just want to be clear about, it, make sure I understood.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should speak or, sorry.
No, that's, we're probably gonna say the same
I
thing.
don't-
Go ahead.
oh, Then you go. You're my boss.
Just go for it, Kathy.
No,
Kathy,
her-
trust
I'm
me, she
having
won't
her go
fire you.
for it.
I was just gonna add that it was my impression doing, in the reading that I did, that there were a couple of other reasons why the decks were considered a good idea. One of them was for ADA accessibility, especially if they're not, if the street's not closed. And the other was that at least from a public works standpoint, it was considered a little bit safer to be up off the street with cars going by if the street's not closed. How specific that is, I don't have any data, but those are the conversations that I've had.
Thanks, Laura. Anything to add, Kathy?
Yeah, that's not what I was gonna say.
Okay.
So I'm in touch with a lot of the restaurants, and so they kind of tell me what works and what doesn't work. And I'll agree, it told me that last year, and I don't know if anybody can back this up, that Fat Thai did not have decking. I'll agree it did, but then they also went out into the street, and he asked me that, I'll agree that even if we were gonna go back to 214, if we could not require this decking that he bought, with his transfer, because he's able to put more tables outside. So if he was gonna lose that extra space of the street closure, at least he could get a few more in there because he didn't have to put up his decking. Another thing is they tend to not take down the decking by the time they have to. Some of them, not all of them. So by October 15th, some of them are still lingering out there. So I'm just telling you, relaying to you what was relayed to me.
That's helpful.
Right. Obviously, because none of us were on here before 2016, the deck issue was debated. And if it's anything like our other ordinances, I think a lot of thought went into that. Like you said, I'm not hearing, I'm sure there's some businesses like the new owners of Alegria who would like to be on the street. I personally don't feel the need to rethink that entire ordinance right now. I think I'm trusting that there was a lot of thought that went into it. So I'm inclined to keep the 2014 ordinance, and if folks feel otherwise, it's not a deal breaker to me, but I just think we'd be opening up a big discussion because a lot of thought went into that. So not that there's benefits changing it, but that's my thought. So, and we're not making decisions, but it would be good to see if there's folks feeling strongly one way or the other. If you're not ready to speak, we can keep talking about closures. Maybe they all go hand in hand.
Dan, I would just say on that topic, if we're going to move on, both of those sort of make sense to me. I agree with you that a lot of work, I'm sure, went into the 2014 ordinance about decks. I'm sure a lot of the business owners participated in that. So I'm inclined to respect that work, but I also agree with Erica that it seems to have worked well for the past couple of years for people to, if you kept the square footage the same and the other requirements the same, and all you changed was, if there's, I'm looking in the ordinance and just not moving fast enough. If there's sort of a line that we could strike that's requires a deck. I actually don't even see that specific requirement in the ordinance. It says it must be visually cohesive and well integrated with the rest of the town's right of way. I'd be open to a very minimal change, limited to just whether you have to put down a deck surface or not, to allow some of the businesses that use the barriers. And we didn't seem to have any issues with stormwater runoff or traffic or any other issues. So I think we've got 2 years of data to suggest that those are okay.
Let's Kathy, for clarification, what kind of timing is necessary to allow businesses? When would we have to make, when's our drop dead date to make a decision on this? As you feel like,
Just because of the backlog at the state, I would say your next meeting.
okay.
Could I clarify though? I mean, question was exactly that. If people could know that we're sticking with everything except maybe whether it has to be a deck. And I honestly don't see the word deck even in this word.
Well, it had to be at the level of the curve.
Okay.
So that's the only way you're gonna get there is to look at that. So that's not in there, but I think it says somewhere in there at the level, you have to be at curve level. There was a huge discussion, like Warren said, about ADA accessibility.
Yeah, if we're keeping the square footage the same, then it seems like they'd be able to apply for their permits.
Right, because they don't really have to say that it's a deck. They give a drawing and it can be
Yeah.
very rough and they just have to give dimensions. So that would work fine.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
ADA?
yeah, Carol, if you would just, Carol, would you just come and? on the
Yes,
mic?
so I guess my question is on the ADA, then when we had, the Public Works brought those, ramps, those yellow ramps, so you could get from sidewalk to street. Is that not comply then? Maybe is that not what? Right, so I'm just bringing that up. And then those also did let the storm, the storm flow. Well, you did have to get out there and maintain it a little bit though. But when it was raining, you didn't really use it, but there was a little bit of storm or, rain. It could block up a little bit, but it can do that during the winter too, just with snow and ice. So, it's just an issue like that. If you have that, that's something that the business owner needs to address. But that was just one thing that the Public Works did make available. So a point.
So am I hearing that prior to COVID, anybody who addressed this issue did it with decks? But what we learned through COVID is that you could actually meet our existing resolution by the ramps and the barricades, you think?
I think they worked, they were, an emergency situation and they were working with the restaurants. And so as long as they had, the big issue was the ADA with the decking. And as long as they brought the ramp in, I think Jay and Kevin felt that they were addressing that problem.
I mean, I'm reading the ordinance, which is in our packet on page 22. And all it says, I won't spend much time on it because it's actually really brief. It says standards. 1, all outdoor dining areas must be fully accessible to the physically handicapped. Doesn't say how. 2, outdoor dining area must be visually cohesive and well integrated with the rest of the town's right of ways. 3, must include a passageway and emergency exit. Mentions semi-permanent barriers around the perimeter. And then 4, insurance, 5, license agreement. So it doesn't in that specify, maybe somewhere else, but it doesn't mention deck, level, or anything.
So I don't know what happened,
Yeah.
but they started building elaborate decks.
Right. Yeah.
They were building elaborate decks out there, so something.
And it must state elsewhere the square footage, because this doesn't mention that either, that it's.
It has like a parking space.
Yeah.
Okay. It just says prescribed amount of linear.
Yeah, but it doesn't say in that
Yeah.
ordinance. So maybe, I think the point is like, we're gonna come back to this, right? Because we can't pass any new ordinances or any changes tonight, but it seems like that holds up really well and is more flexible than we thought it was and probably doesn't require any changes.
Well, I think what I was hoping to do tonight, what Kathy is saying is we need to act quickly on this. So if there were modifications,
Right.
we would want to give guidance. But thanks for scrutinizing the ordinance. It's sounding like we may not need to.
Yeah, and it sounds like people could go ahead with their liquor license modifications based on that we're not planning any changes to that.
Anybody feel strongly? I mean, there's a little bit of an unknown, but go ahead.
No, just under improvements of the 2014, it says that All specifications need to be approved in advance by the town. Any changes shall require additional approval by the town. But you're right, it doesn't say anything specifically about deck.
Okay. Well, let's move on. To street closures. So obviously the petition suggested, some supporters of the petition said close it permanently. Some said close it regularly. Some are saying let's keep the closures as is and focus additional closures on 4th Street between Main and Garfield. Anybody want to kick us off with an idea? Why? I'm just kidding.
My initial thought was like a Friday, Saturday night, 5 to 10 PM sort of thing. Looks like most of the retail establishments and medical and all that sort of office oriented stuff is closed at 5. And it seems like that would be the time when it would activate the space. I'm still open to that, but I'm concerned about all these, concerns that not being a business owner on Main Street, I don't quite understand why the impacts seem to be so large, like for businesses on the other end. And I'm not denying that they are. I just say, I don't understand some of those nuances, I guess. It seems to me that with a closure of one block, you're within, a pretty short distance of parking for anything in there, probably about as close as you park at City Market at any point to the front door. You're half a block away. And people go around and then they're right in front of all those other businesses. So that still seems like a reasonable thing to consider to me. I would not consider anything more than Friday, Saturday nights, 5 to 10 PM personally. I think all the rest of that would be chalked up to COVID and all that. And I think limiting the seating for the establishments to this same, the deck ordinance that we just realized doesn't have a deck in it. That kind of, I think, takes away some of those concerns about fairness and expansion of some businesses just because they're on that block. So I'm still open to a Friday, Saturday night, 5 to 10 PM sort of thing for 3rd to 4th on Main. I'm not saying that's exactly where I'm going to end up, but I'm open to that. I'm also open to this other idea, which I think is a really creative idea. And I really appreciate that people have thought creatively here of focusing on 4th Street and closing just that block between Garfield and Main. I think that wouldn't probably be worth doing unless somebody, whether it's Carbondale Arts Creative District, somebody was going to kind of take that on and activate that space. Like, I don't know that anything magical happens if you just close that block, right? If something magical happens when you say there's a fire there and we're doing light up Carbondale, right? Then it's great. And when we have put a stage there and had concerts and stuff like that. So I'd want to hear more about kind of the plans for that. And then I would still see that probably as the same kind of thing, probably a Friday and Saturday night. And I'm thinking like Memorial Day to Labor Day on both of those. I'm thinking this is a summer festive atmosphere. If you count up your total days, you're adding, you've already got Fridays closed on Main Street. You're adding 10 or 12 more 5-hour closures in the year. So I think that might lessen some of the impacts and concerns that I've learned a lot from hearing.
Thanks, Ben. I'll offer my thoughts. I think I'll start big scale because there were several comments about closing the street entirely. And I was on the Glenwood City Council when there was talk of bypassing Glenwood, and a lot of people wanted to move all the traffic off of Grand Avenue. And there were ideas way back then to say, well, Grand Avenue kind of is what it is. Let's move the vibrancy off of Grand Avenue. And I think Glenwood has done that pretty successfully. I love the idea of pedestrian malls. I love the idea of minimizing street traffic. My hunch tells me is we don't want to do that on Main Street. There are other places to do that. So at this time, I'm not necessarily inclined in exploring closing Main Street permanently. I think the other thing that concerns me is, I mean, I've spent 6 years really trying to identify and carve out the gems of Carbondale. And man, is First Friday right up there on the top of the list. It is awesome for so many reasons. And what I am really concerned about, and as we said, we've got other events that have a similar effect. We close it down and it just creates such great community by having that connection. And I don't want to inundate us and think, well, if we just do more of it, it's going to be even better. I worry that that may take a little bit of the shine off of that gem. So even though I want the same thing, I worry that if we did it too much, it could diminish those special events. So I'm with Ben in that I would certainly entertain Fridays and Saturdays, but I would only entertain them if there was common agreement among the businesses, as we've been saying for the last few years, to say, hey, if this is what you guys think is good, we'll support it. I'm not necessarily hearing that. And I do think that there are ways to activate that street and Carbondale Arts, and everybody knows exactly how to activate that. And I think this board would be open to activating it as often, and we have been open to activating it and closing the street whenever possible. But yeah, I'm just not hearing enough support to say, let's move forward with additional closures like we have on Main Street, like we have in the last 2 years. But that's not something we have to decide tonight. So if there's additional dialogue and there's continues to be collaboration, I think we're all ears. But I personally, I guess I would say, like the idea of focusing any additional closures on Main Street beyond what we did before COVID to 4th Street at this time. Other thoughts? Great, thanks for Heather.
Yeah, I think probably I land somewhat where you do, Dan, that since having to, during COVID, be forced to have the conversation about additional closures, and then obviously as we sit here in this moment in time, entertaining this conversation of continuing more extensive closures, more days, more areas on Main Street, is just creating a lot of conflict. And I think conflict that can be resolved and probably end up in a really healthy place. But to go back to where we were essentially pre-COVID, everybody supported that. And so I think that's really hard for the broader public. For me, I'm a short timer, and when I step down, my view is that those closures are amazing. It's a wonderful feeling. It's safe, it's vibrant, it's awesome. But knowing behind the scenes that it would be sowing some of that conflict, I would really struggle with that. So for me to just make sure that this conversation can continue, but in a way that, is not, under duress of deadline and can be done more thoughtfully. It feels like to go to where we were pre-COVID allows that to happen maybe in a safer and healthier way. And the businesses can get together. Love the idea of a downtown council, like get that rolling, and do this in a really safe space that, doesn't feel like it's kind of under the gun. And then also a couple of people I think are in support. We call them living labs, and I love the idea of that for 4th Street. I think that would be amazing. And to have somebody, hopefully Carbondale Arts, it's a little bit of their front door to us, perhaps, and Parks and Rec, kind of wrap their arms around that idea of a living lab. Ultimately, that may be something we want to make permanent. So it's just a wonderful way to do that, in a temporary fashion, and then have somebody own that and make it amazing and program it and do all the same street art and all, all that fabulous stuff that was on Main Street when we closed it. Be pretty incredible.
Thanks, Heather. I wanted to mention just a couple more things and I forgot about it. I do recognize the impacts to the businesses as well as the neighbors, and to Greg's point. I think it's hard. I walk Greg's neighborhood quite often, and the vibrancy we want on Main Street is almost rivaled by the serenity we want walking around downtown. And so I think that's one of the impacts that I recognize is if we close Main Street more, we're pushing vehicular impacts where the streets weren't designed for them. So I hear you, Greg, that if we were to do that, we'd have to mitigate them. So other thoughts? Lonnie?
Yeah, well, I'll just go off my notes here a little bit. There's been a lot to digest. Dining decks and CCD facilitation aside, my sense is that the strong community reaction we've heard is an extension of the post-pandemic bounce back that we touched on a little bit last week with tourism. I'm okay with decks and or on-street dining as long as any associated closures are inclusive of each block of beneficial businesses. And then I would agree that either on a Friday or a Saturday, or perhaps both, depending upon how it goes, would be the optimum time frame. I also agree that doing it more often and on a more permanent basis would take the luster off of our iconic events such as First Friday and others that we have a lot of buildup for. Given the stated competition between 133 and the downtown draw, I would maybe suggest having each block of businesses rotate and taking ownership of how they're going to bring the public in. So for instance, I don't know, I've got to look at a map, but give the block between second and third one evening to do something, and then third and fourth and fifth to seventh, or I can't remember how this actually all plays out as far as who the beneficial businesses would be. But that would really perhaps help to pull the community together and give a sense of ownership of how, an opportunity like this is going to benefit their cash flow. So that's kind of where I'm landed at the moment.
Lonnie, could you give me a high level summary? I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying.
I don't have a high level summary.
Just a couple bullets. Like I heard you say you would entertain more dining area. Or did I hear
I
that
would
correct?
entertain, whatever it is, if they've got decks, they want to use decks, that's fine. I'm okay with on-street dining as well, as long as it is inclusive of each of the beneficial businesses up and down Main Street. So a solution for that would be to give one block at a time an opportunity to do that on a Friday or a Saturday evening. And thematically or somehow, make it their responsibility to activate that block, for example. And then nobody would feel left out. We wouldn't be closing the whole street. And it would be kind of taking this in little bite-sized pieces. There has been a lot of conversation over the years, and not to digress too much, but, mauling off Main Street has been a topic for the 25 years that I've been here. But it's just not practical because of the way the town is laid out, right? So a little bit at a time might be helpful. It might prove out some things and it would make, everybody feel that they had an equal opportunity in having that enclosed space that, would draw most people into that encapsulated area that had some kind of a theme or some kind of a promotion going on that would increase the vibrancy in front of their particular establishment. So.
Dan, just to make sure I understand something.
Hmm.
Are you saying that, for instance, you alternate the street closure? 1 week could be between third and fourth, 1 week between fourth and fifth, 1 week between third and second?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that.
Yeah.
Correctly.
I certainly understand the intent for fairness and appreciate the creativity. I think it brings in a whole nother level of complexity. And again, I would look for the businesses to say, we think
Yeah.
this is a good idea.
Not on us. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yep, Luis?
Just a couple topics also that I think are important because they got brought up is the expansion of more closures during First Friday. It does seems like that is a little bit exclusionary in terms of where it starts and where it ends. So if it could be expanded one block in each direction, I'd love to see that. The other thing, which I think is important, while obviously all the businesses do not agree on the street closures from what we've seen, there has been overwhelming response from the residents with the number of petitions and emails that we've gotten that they do want to see a vibrancy on Main Street. So I want to be sure that's not forgotten as we continue this discussion.
I agree. Just a reminder though, that somebody mentioned that RAFTA has a stake in this. RAFTA being able to turn onto 6th Street is really important. Modifying that route would be a little tricky. So that's one of the reasons why it starts there. The other side of Main Street is more flexible.
I was going to kind of add on to what Louis said. I mean, regardless of this petition, just it's kind of for you guys, so you know this, we get asked this all the time about turning Main Street, and we know that we can't turn Main Street into a pedestrian mall, but I feel like it is one of the number one things that residents, obviously not the business owners on Main Street, bring up to us. And out there campaigning, even right now, people are like, oh, you know what I want? We should close Main Street from the highway to Sopris Drive. And it's just fascinating that it is this desire without people. And Lynn, you're totally right. I think most people sign petitions and don't actually know the impacts of what they're signing, regardless of what it says, but don't understand the impacts that would have. And I think last time during one of the discussions, somebody even was like, oh, well, we'll put this on the ballot. Similar to the short-term rental discussion, where that would be a dreadful way to try and make some sort of public policy that would appease people. So I know, Julie, in your email to us, you were like, let's make a decision and this is it for end. But I think people are going to continue to raise it. We're going to have new trustees in a month or whenever that is. And so I think it is going to be an ongoing discussion. And what I love is that you guys have come together and come up with things that you feel like you mostly agree on and are proposing to us. And I think that's going to be key going forward, honestly. So getting to your question, where you're going to ask me to bullet point my clarifications. I mean, I came in, I guess, probably last week thinking that it would probably be pretty narrow, maybe Friday nights only, maybe Fridays and Saturdays. I think you guys have voiced your opinions very clearly, and I wouldn't want to do anything that adds a burden to businesses, especially coming out of 2 years of COVID, which I know all the businesses are dealing with, are struggling with. So I don't want us to create an added barrier or perceived barrier right now. And then I totally get Greg's point too, and was trying to think of how do we not get cars to go? I mean, do we block off? You can't go right on any of those streets. Because I saw that too, where I would be biking and go around and just, the double lane traffic on Garfield, that's not what that street's for. So I think we would need to do some more thorough planning on figuring out how to accommodate that and accommodate closures or add more parking or something to really make it work. If all of you, if the group proposal does come back and say, actually, we do want Friday nights, or maybe we do want more street closures from what we already have approved, then I'm definitely open to that idea. Like if somebody's got an event idea that adds vibrancy or is some cool thing that we should do, then I think we should, I'd be open to considering that as well.
Marty?
I just want to note, there are two businesses specifically on Main between 3rd and 4th that are very reliant upon drive up. People stop, get out of their cars, go in, pick something up and leave. One we approved for a liquor license last week, and the other is High Q. So I'm just pointing out, closing Friday and Saturday for 12 weeks of the summer has material impact on their revenues. I mean, because people are gonna go somewhere else.
So I'm hearing, what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially maintaining pre-pandemic regulations. We're open to activating Fourth Street as a living lab. Kind of whatever somebody wants to propose. I'm not hearing, Marty, you might be an exception. I'm not hearing too much disagreement that we would be open to additional street closures as long as there's that common agreement. But right now, we're kind of sticking with pre-pandemic ideas. Unless I missed something.
Well, what do you mean about additional street closures?
If they came back, if this whole group was holding hands and singing Kumbaya and say, let's close Friday and Saturdays, I'd say, okay.
Yeah, no, I would love that.
Yeah.
I want them to get together and sing Kumbaya.
Yeah.
I haven't heard the song in a long time.
Right. So because I think it's important that we give some direction. If we all said, heck no street closures, then you guys know you might as well not even discuss it.
I'm just saying, the way it stands now, we have street closures on First Friday. We have street closures for other special events.
Right.
And, you know, that's what I said, let them go, come up with what their plan is, speak to some of the other people who have different ideas, come up with some type of a compromise, come up with something that'll work for everyone. I don't want it to be us versus them.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. This board is open to
Yeah,
other
100%.
ideas if there's common agreement, so. And you look puzzled.
I mean, I do come back a little bit to what Luis said, like there's the business interests and there's the community at large, and sometimes they're the same interests and sometimes they're a little bit different. And it seems like on this, they're a little bit different. And so I don't want the community at large to feel like we didn't hear them also. They're not all here tonight, right? So the room is packed with business owners, which is great. But there are a lot of people who have emailed us, and whether it's signing the petition or whatever. So I think I'd like to stay open for one more meeting to considering basically what you're laying out. Like, what's the idea for a 4th Street closure between Garfield and Main? Or what's the idea for, and how much support is there for a, 3rd to 4th Main Street limited closure, weekend nights only? Because that's narrower than what was put out there. And I think what was put out there on the petition and just people's perception of the way we've done it in the past was the assumption of what we were discussing, understandably. And people were talking about the rodeo night and all these other things. Like we've eliminated those options now. So it's a fairly narrow discussion of, do we want to consider Friday and Saturday nights on one block of Main? Do we want to consider 4th Street between Garfield and Main? I'd like to still have that discussion and have people address just that.
Yeah, if there's proposals, right? We can't force them to say, give us an idea on 4th Street. But we're definitely open to that. Regarding the vibrancy, I want to be clear. I think everybody in this room has said the more vibrancy, the better. I think our job as a board on almost every issue is to find that balance, with cost or impacts. And I think what I'm hearing is, for right now, we've found the maximum vibrancy for the acceptable level of impact. And that's speaking for myself, that's where I am. And to me, to go to more closures, unless there's common agreement, the impacts start to outweigh the pros. So I'm not ignoring the vibrancy advocates. I'm just.
Yeah, I think you're right. We're trying to find that balance. And the one thing I'd add, this concern about like what differentiates Main Street from the Highway 133 kind of business corridor that's evolving out there. I feel like this could be part of that. Like whatever it is, like obviously First Friday is where everybody wants to be. And I would imagine that the businesses not on Main Street are relatively empty and everyone on Main Street is relatively packed on First Friday. So it just seems like there's still a potential to make this a positive for Main Street businesses that really does differentiate it. That's where when people come to town, like Lynn said, and they don't know where Main Street is, that's hard to imagine, but I trust that that's true, that that has happened before. That people would say, well, Main Street's this place where there's this outdoor vibrant scene, whether that's a little block of Fourth or a little block of Main, or maybe it's just on First Fridays.
And I think that's another discussion, like more wayfinding stuff, like, heck yeah, no. Marty, we'll close down.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. Every single restaurant in Carbondale is slammed on First Friday. There is a wait at every single restaurant, at the Goat, at Atina, at Honey Butter. So it isn't just Main Street. So it is bringing people to town. Some of them make it down to Main Street. Some people don't want to go down to Main Street. So, I mean, it brings vitality to the whole town.
Lauren, closing
I
comments.
just wanted to remind the board and ask if you wanted to consider when you talk about this bigger issue, the request from.
Mike, please.
Oh,
They can't hear.
Can't hear Lauren.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
If you wanted to consider also the request from certain businesses to expand the First Friday closure. Particularly the Clay Center wrote a letter and a couple of other businesses wrote letters about expanding that,
the boundaries.
the boundaries of First Friday, specifically First Friday.
Yeah, I didn't hear any opposition to that, and I heard businesses express support for that, so sure.
Would we have to take that up with the chamber and the First Friday committee?
Obviously,
talk
they'd
to
be
them.
involved,
Yeah.
yeah, but I don't see.
I just didn't want it to get forgotten.
Yeah, I'm totally open to that. It's just interesting that that didn't come up with the whole special event task force. Like we just approved a calendar for the whole year that's got it block by block and date by date, and nobody raised that issue. So maybe it's just that now it's been raised, and that's fine. I'm totally open to that. I'm just not sure why it wasn't seen then, but because I think that we do the whole street for a few months and then we do a little bit limited for the shoulder season sort of, so.
Okay, so to be clear, if anybody is not comfortable with the direction we have and want to propose something different, we're here, we're open to ideas. We can calendar something in April for another discussion or next week for that matter. If there's a desire to have that. But right now, I feel like there's common agreement. What's that look for, Kathy? Okay.
I think she was giving me the look.
Okay.
It's just because of school vacation next week.
Oh, right, yeah.
You're not gonna be here.
I will be, but it'll be a small, so I wouldn't suggest a discussion next week, but,
I'd say
okay.
April.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time and efforts, and we will adjourn. Amy, I'm happy to